Hey guys, tonight we begin with the life of a worker at the Great Pyramid. Dust in your throat, sun on your back, and limestone shards that never stop cutting. The days are long, the bread is coarse, and that stone isn't going to move itself. So while you're getting comfortable, feel free to tap like and subscribe if this kind of calm, late night history is your thing. And I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment with your city and what time it was when you pressed play. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The heat hits you before you even reach the quarry. It's not just the kind that warms your skin, it's the kind that settles in your bones and seeps through your linen tunic like hot syrup. There's no breeze this morning, only the lazy shimmer of heat rising from the dust-swirled path ahead. Your feet crunch over crushed stone as you join the slow-moving line of workers, each person carrying the same resigned look that says, "Yes, we're doing this again." The sun hasn't even reached its highest point, but already it feels like midday. You wipe your brow with a forearm that's coated in a chalky film of dust before your first task has even begun. You're not entirely sure what time it is, but the overseer doesn't need a clock. His shouting starts at exactly the moment your body still wishes it was asleep. His voice cuts across the camp like a whip crack, barking commands in a tone that suggests he's deeply offended by your very existence. He's standing on a raised slab with a stick in one hand and a measuring rod in the other, glaring as if the pyramid depends entirely on you not tripping over your own sandals. And in a way, maybe it does. When you're hauling stones the size of bathtubs uphill on a wooden sledge, it doesn't take much to turn progress into a pile of broken limbs and spilled beer rations. The quarry itself is a bowl of broken light and noise, carved into the limestone cliffs. Like someone took a giant spoon and scooped out a chunk of Egypt. It rings with the echo of chisels on stone, voices bouncing off the walls, and the dull thud of falling rubble. Men dot the pale surfaces like ants, some crouched low with copper tools, others dragging ropes or brushing sweat from their eyes. You can barely see the sky, just a thin sliver overhead, baking everything beneath it in an unrelenting glow. There's no shade, no rest, and no privacy. The rocks don't care who you are, whether you're here because of a tax debt, a family obligation, or simply because someone higher up decided you'd look good on a work roster. The limestone will scrape your skin all the same. Your job today is to help cut and prep blocks for the next sledge team. That means hours of hammering, wedging, and shouting over the din. The tools are simple: bronze chisels if you're lucky, Ballerite pounders if you're not. The dust gets into everything. Your mouth tastes like powdered stone, your nostrils burn, and the grit creeps into the corners of your eyes until the whole world feels grainy. Sweat drips down your back in rivulets, soaking the waistband of your belt and leaving your tunic in salty patches. You try not to think about how many more hours you have left, because counting only makes it worse. The rhythm of work is relentless. A chisel strike, then a pause. A grunt as someone shifts a rock. A call for water that goes unanswered. Sometimes the silence between sounds is more exhausting than the noise itself. You glance at the foreman, hoping he'll signal a break, but he's too busy yelling at a younger boy who's apparently measuring the wrong end of the stone block. The boy looks about 12 and already has the 1,000-yard stare of a veteran. You were like that once too, until the heat and repetition burned the wonder out of your bones. Occasionally, you catch glimpses of other teams arriving from the Nile with supplies, wooden planks, rope bundles, and huge clay jugs of water that never seem to make it this far into the pit. The porters look just as miserable as you, their shoulders bent beneath the weight, their feet dragging through the powdery ground. They don't speak much. No one does. Words cost energy, and energy is a commodity too precious to waste on small talk in a place like this. Somewhere behind you, a rock shears off a ledge and tumbles with a series of dull thuds to the quarry floor. A brief shout follows. Someone might be hurt, or maybe just startled. There's a pause in the work for a few seconds, a collective intake of breath, and then everything resumes as if nothing happened. That's how it works here. If you're lucky, the injury is minor. If you're not, the next guy in line gets your job, and the overseer pretends he never knew your name. Even the flies move on fast. But despite everything, there's a strange rhythm to the suffering. A pattern that settles in after a few weeks, maybe a few months, depending on how stubborn your spirit is. You wake, you work, you ache, you sleep. It's not noble or inspiring. It's just necessary. The pyramid won't build itself, and no one's waiting to carve your face into its wall. You're not a noble, not a priest, not even an overseer. You're the hands, the back, the sunburned feet, the voice shouting heave that gets lost in the dust and the decades. And yet, the stones move. Slowly, stubbornly, but they move. You and the others chip away at the limestone block in front of you, knowing full well that someone else will haul it, someone else will place it, and someone else entirely will get the credit. But that doesn't stop the process. Maybe it's because there's bread at the end of the day. Maybe it's because there's a faint hope of surviving long enough to go home. Or maybe it's just because no one's ever given you another choice. By midday, the sun is a flat disk of white fire, and your arms feel like they belong to someone else. You take a moment to press your forehead against the cool, shadowed side of a rock, one of the few places where the sun hasn't touched. It smells like dust and sweat and something older than language. You close your eyes and think of the Nile, of shade trees and soft sand, and for a moment, you almost remember what it felt like to not be tired. But the moment passes quickly, chased away by the overseer's whistle. You push yourself upright again, fingers sore, nails split, shoulders tight. There are more blocks to prep. The line of workers stretches like a long, sagging rope across the quarry floor. No one stops moving. No one argues. They all know the pace. They all know that this is just one part of a much longer chain. A chain that will stretch from the pit to the riverbank, from the riverbank to the causeway, from the causeway to the massive stepped base where the stones rise, one by one, into the sky. And that's where you'll be headed soon. Not yet, but soon enough. Because once the stone is shaped and ready, it needs to be hauled across a landscape just as brutal as this quarry. It will take dozens of men, long ropes, oiled sledges, and more patience than anyone admits to having. That journey is coming. You can feel it waiting just over the edge of the horizon. Another task in a day, already packed with sweat and strain. But for now, you lift the chisel again, take a breath filled with grit and determination, and bring it down on the stone. The sound rings out once more, echoing off the walls, carried through the heat like a promise that tomorrow will look exactly the same. The stone is ready now, cut, shaped, and resting awkwardly at the edge of the quarry like a sleeping beast that knows it's about to be kicked awake. It's your job, and the job of 20 other sun-scoured men, to move it. The sledges wait nearby, wooden runners smoothed and oiled with animal fat, groaning under the thought of what's coming. You gather around the block as the foreman circles like a buzzard, pointing with his stick, marking out rope assignments, foot positions, pacing instructions. He talks as if he's directing a ballet, but the truth is, this dance ends with someone limping. You grab your section of the rope, already slick with grease and dust. It digs into your palms like it's testing your resolve before the stone even moves. Beside you, another man coughs dryly, his chest already rattling from the morning's work. No one speaks. Not because they can't, but because what's the point? You know the steps. You've done this before. The shouts come in rhythm now. Pull, brace, adjust, pull again. And then the thing lurches. It's a horrible feeling. The first moment the stone shifts. Your legs lock, the rope snaps taut, and your back strains like it's being asked, to carry the whole country. The sledge creaks, grinds, and begins its stubborn crawl forward, inch by inch, foot by foot. The ground, raked flat and sprinkled with wet silt to reduce friction, still feels like it's fighting back. You keep pulling, your heels dragging ruts into the earth, your breath coming in shallow gasps, the taste of rope fibers and old sweat. The sun is merciless. It bounces off the limestone and the bleached wood, finding every exposed patch of skin and setting it to a low, steady burn. You're already drenched. Your tunic clings to your ribs, a second skin of damp linen and dust. Somewhere along the rope line, someone yells that the stone's tilting, and the whole operation stalls as the men at the rear scramble to wedge logs beneath the uneven runner. You drop your rope, flexing your hands to get the blood flowing again, but even your fingers feel slow, like they've been left out in the heat too long. Eventually, the sledge rights itself. The signal is given, and you all pull again. The rope is heavier now, wet with sweat and Nile muck. It smells like livestock and exhaustion. A fly lands on your nose, bold and indifferent, and you don't even bother to swat it. There's a certain humility that comes with dragging multi-ton stones through the desert. You start picking your battles. Each step forward takes everything. Your muscles tremble, your feet slip on the oily soil, and the sledge seems to groan louder with every meter gained. A man near the front stumbles, the rope jerking sharply as he tries to recover. The line stutters, but doesn't break. You dig in, using the weight of your body more than your strength, leaning into the pull like a ship's mast in wind. There's no room for pride here. Just balance, sweat, and brute repetition. Breaks are rare, and when they come, they're brief. You collapse into a crouch beside the sledge, shoulders heaving, dust sticking to your skin like an extra layer of grime. Someone passes a water jar down the line, and you take a careful sip, just enough to wet your tongue. Too much, and you'll cramp. Not enough, and you'll bake from the inside out. The overseer watches the scene from a distance, arms folded, unimpressed. You imagine what it must feel like to never lift anything heavier than a stylus. Probably clean hands, probably soft sandals. You haul the sledge along a prepared path, a rough corridor of compacted earth leading toward the pyramid site. Workers ahead spread more water to slick the route, their jars clanking as they hurry. It helps, but only a little. The sledge still groans, still fights you, still seems like it wants to return to the quarry and bury itself forever. A few of the guys try to sing, a simple rhythm chant, half whispered through parched throats, but it dies out quickly. No one has the breath to spare. The journey stretches on. Time becomes a blur of rope, shouts, and aching limbs. Your brain detaches from your body after a while, retreating somewhere quieter while your muscles go through the motions. This is what endurance feels like. Not heroic, not glorious, just necessary. The stone needs moving. You are the mover. That is the bargain. When you finally reach the site, when the pyramid's dusty silhouette looms just ahead, it feels almost surreal. The base of the monument is crowded with other sledges, other teams, all in various stages of struggle. Some are trying to steer their stones up crude ramps. Others are stuck in muddy patches, their men arguing over where the slope went wrong. And some, like you, are just arriving, too tired to speak, too sore to think. A group of handlers appears to relieve you. You drop the rope and step back, watching as they guide the stone into its staging area. The moment your hands are empty, your body notices every injury at once. Shoulders like fire, ankles that don't seem to bend anymore. A patch of skin on your palm is torn, leaving a raw oval that pulses with each heartbeat. You stretch, slowly, carefully, and realize you're coated in a thin sheen of grit, limestone, silt, and sweat baked into a human crust. You look around and see the same expressions mirrored on every face. Men slumped in place, leaning on one another, sucking water from clay jars with trembling hands. No one speaks of pride or progress. No one points to the rising pyramid and says, "We did that, because this is just today, and there's another block waiting tomorrow." Still, the structure is growing. Every day, a little taller, a little sharper, a little closer to the sky. You wonder if that matters. If somewhere down the line, years or centuries from now, someone will look at it and know what it cost. Not in gold or treasure, but in backs strained and calluses split, in crushed toes and sleepless nights, in the simple act of dragging a stone across a desert floor with nothing but a rope and a prayer. But those thoughts fade as the call for food echoes across the site. Your stomach growls like it remembers something your mind had forgotten. Bread, beer, a place to sit down for more than 2 minutes. You start toward the food stalls, feet dragging, muscles stiff. The day isn't over, but this part is done. Tomorrow, there will be more stones, more ropes, more shouting. But tonight, if the flies allow it, you might just sleep long enough to forget the sound of the sledge. And with the thought of food in your head and sand still between your teeth, you limp toward the camp. The smell of barley bread grows stronger with each step. You're not sure if it's a reward or just another part of the routine, but either way, you'll take it. Soon, you'll sit in the shade with the others. You'll chew through the coarse crust, wash it down with warm beer, and talk about anything but stones. Maybe someone will share a joke. Maybe someone will finally admit how much their back hurts. Maybe the night breeze will come early. Maybe. But that's for after the meal. For now, you follow the scent of bread like it's a guiding star toward the momentary peace of camp and into a new layer of pyramid life where food, rest, and fellowship try to balance out the pain of the day. By the time you reach the edge of the workers' camp, you're walking like someone twice your age. Your spine curves forward, knees stiff, feet swollen inside sandals that gave up hours ago. The stone dust doesn't come off, not really. It clings to your arms and neck in a paste of sweat and sand, turning your skin pale in patches, cracked in others. You run a hand through your hair and feel grit there too, as if the quarry followed you home and decided to stay. But despite all that, the scent of barley bread is somehow comforting. Smoky, nutty, maybe even a little sweet, depending on who made it today. You pass into the food area, just a line of open ovens with women and older boys ladling beer into jars, slicing loaves, and shooing away the flies that hang in lazy clouds over everything. The fire pits glow in the fading light, and the sound of sizzling dough mixes with the murmured voices of dozens of tired men, all slumped on stones or mats, chewing and swallowing without ceremony. You find your spot, a flat stone shaded by a plank of worn wood. Someone hands you a cracked jar, half full of beer, and you nod your thanks without speaking. The beer is warm and a little sour, more gruel than drink, thick with floating bits of mash. But it fills your stomach and dulls the edge of your thirst. And right now, that's all that matters. You sip slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle into your bones. Your hands shake slightly from exertion, and when you flex your fingers, dirt presses into the lines of your palms. Your nails are chipped and blackened, one of them split straight down the center. You tear a strip of linen from your belt and wrap it, knowing it won't help much, but it gives you something to do. The bread arrives next. A hunk of coarse barley loaf, hard around the edges and flecked with bits of sand that got into the dough. That's normal. You've bitten into more pebbles than you care to count. The first mouthful is dry and chewy, but your stomach doesn't care. It's food. It's yours. And for a few brief moments, you're not dragging a stone, not bracing your back against rope, not swallowing dust like it's air. You're just a man eating a meal with others who understand exactly how much you hurt. Around you, voices begin to rise. Someone makes a joke about the sledge team that lost control of their stone near the ramp and had to chase it like it was a runaway goat. Laughter rolls out in short bursts, more coughing than joy, but it's genuine. You smile despite yourself, the corner of your mouth cracking from dryness. Another man pulls off his sandal and shows a blister the size of a fig to collective groans and mock horror. Someone else mutters that maybe next time the gods could send a wind or even a bit of shade, and a few heads nod in weary agreement. This is the rhythm of camp life. Work hard, eat fast, try not to think too much. No one here talks about the Pharaoh or the overseers or the pyramid, not during dinner. That belongs to the day. The night is for aches, idle stories, and whatever sense of camaraderie you can scrape together before sleep comes. You lean back against the plank, eyes half closed. The sky above has begun to shift. The brightness fades into amber, then purple, then a velvet stretch of stars slowly asserting themselves. Somewhere, a flute plays, soft, hesitant notes drifting through the warm air. You don't know who's playing. Could be one of the water carriers. Could be someone from the fish camp nearby. The music isn't perfect, but it's real, and in its shaky melody, you hear something like peace. The beer settles in your gut, heavy and calming. You're tired, yes, but more than that, you're worn. Not the dramatic, tragic kind of worn. Just the steady erosion of hours in stone, of rope burn and sunstroke, of joints that click when they didn't used to. You stretch out your legs, feeling the day's bruises like beads beneath your skin. Your heel is cracked. Your shoulders throb. There's a cut on your shin you don't remember getting. And yet, there's a strange pride in it all. Not the kind you can show, not something you'd brag about. Just a quiet knowledge that you've survived another day. That the bread and beer are yours because you earned them. Not with coins, but with effort. With sweat. With chipped nails and calloused hands. The stars begin to thicken overhead. The moon isn't out yet, so the night feels vast and empty, like the gods left the sky unfinished. You glance toward the pyramid, its dark silhouette rising in the distance. It looks smaller from here, almost like a shadow of itself. During the day, it's an unforgiving giant. At night, it's a quiet ghost, watching. Beside you, one of the older workers lets out a long sigh and says, half to himself, "You think the Pharaoh even knows how we eat?" Someone snorts in response. Another voice says, "I bet he's got bread without rocks in it." The group chuckles, low and dry, like a chorus of cracked drums. You don't join in this time. You're too focused on the dull throb in your hands, the way the skin around your knuckles is tight and red. As the fire pits begin to die down, people drift off in groups of twos and threes. Some to the barracks, some to the sleeping mats laid out under makeshift lean-tos. A few linger, trading gossip or playing dice with polished stones. You stay seated a little longer, watching the sparks curl upward from the last cooking fire, dancing briefly before vanishing into the dark. It reminds you how quickly things disappear here, how easily a man can be replaced, how fast a scar becomes just another mark under the sun. You finish the last of your bread, brush the crumbs from your lap, and rise slowly, knees popping. Tomorrow will be the same. Same stones, same path. Same aching hands and blistered feet. You already know that. But tonight, there's a place to lie down. Maybe a good dream if you're lucky. Maybe silence if the man beside you doesn't snore like a camel again. You head toward the sleeping area, fingers brushing the frayed edges of your linen belt. The splinter in your thumb, now a familiar companion. The wind picks up slightly, warm, dry, and carrying the scent of distant cook fires and stone dust. It's not much, but it feels like a kindness. As you duck beneath the low cloth roof of the barracks, you hear someone whisper a short prayer. Not to the Pharaoh, not to the gods of the Nile, just to anyone who might listen. A request for strong legs tomorrow, for a light load, for bread with fewer pebbles. And then you lay down on the worn mat, close your eyes, and let the dull roar of the day fade into the quiet rustle of sleep. Outside, the pyramid waits, unmoving and silent. Inside, the camp settles into stillness, one aching breath at a time. The barracks offer shelter, but not much else. It's a long, low building of mud brick and timber, barely tall enough to stand upright inside. The air is thick with body heat, old sweat, and the sour edge of unwashed feet. You duck through the entrance and pause, blinking against the gloom. A few oil lamps flicker along the walls, casting orange pools of light and long, jittery shadows. They don't illuminate much, just enough to find your mat and avoid stepping on someone else's elbow. There's no real privacy here. Everyone sleeps side by side, row upon row of mats laid over packed earth. A narrow path winds between them like a dry stream. Most of the men are already down, sprawled in various stages of exhaustion. A few still murmur to each other in low voices, and one man in the corner picks at his toenails with a small knife, flicking the pieces away like they offended him personally. You step over a snoring form and reach your own place. A frayed mat, a folded cloth for a pillow, and a wooden chest that holds your one spare tunic and a handful of beetle-bitten keepsakes. You sit down slowly, lowering yourself like the whole pyramid is riding on your back. Every joint protests. Your shoulders burn. Your thighs twitch involuntarily, still echoing the rhythm of the day's labor. Lying flat feels like falling into wet clay, difficult and strangely jarring. The mat doesn't cushion much. You feel every lump beneath it, every uneven ridge of earth, but at least it's yours. That counts for something. The man beside you, one of the older workers, lets out a long, wheezy exhale and mutters, "Tell my bones to stop arguing, would you?" You smile faintly in the dark. You know the feeling. It's like your skeleton is holding a grudge against you, reminding you of every bad lift, every stumble, every time you ignored the pain and kept going anyway. The aches are dull and constant now, part of the background noise of your body, like a drumbeat that never quite stops. There's a lull in the barracks as more of the men drift off. The quiet isn't silence. It's full of creaks, shifting mats, soft groans, and the occasional grunt when someone rolls over too quickly. One man talks in his sleep, words half-formed and unintelligible. Another snores with rhythmic violence, prompting a volley of curses and a well-aimed sandal from across the room. The air smells like sweat and oil and something faintly smoky, like the ghost of the evening cook fires has followed everyone inside. You lie still and listen. Somewhere outside, wind rattles the edge of the building. Sand scrapes faintly against the walls. The sound is oddly soothing, like a lullaby whispered in another language. It reminds you of nights in your village, before all this, before stone and rope and blistered hands. There were stars then too, but they felt closer somehow, quieter, like you could talk to them. A few mats over, someone starts humming. A soft, low tune, barely more than a vibration. It fades quickly, either forgotten or silenced by fatigue. You wonder what the song was. Maybe it was about a river, or a harvest, or a woman waiting by a fig tree. Something gentle, something that doesn't exist in this world of hauling and grinding and bruised ribs. Your own thoughts drift in and out, carried by the warmth of the room and the throb in your hands. You think about your tools, whether your chisel will hold up another week, whether your rope will fray in the sun tomorrow. You think about the bread, the beer, the overseer's voice like gravel in your ear, and then you try not to think at all. Sleep doesn't come all at once. It arrives in pieces like a slow tide. You sink into it a little at a time, interrupted by coughing, shifting bodies, and the occasional distant shout from outside. Night in the barracks is never truly quiet. It's a chorus of fatigue, a soundtrack of 100 men slowly surrendering to their limits. Somewhere, someone lights another lamp. The brief flare of flame casts shadows against the far wall, sharp lines that look almost like writing. You stare at them until they blur, until they become shapes you can't name, until they fade with the flicker of the wick. You think about the pyramid, still growing under the stars, still demanding more. More stone, more hands, more names to forget. You wonder, briefly, what it would be like to sleep in the palace. On linen sheets, beneath perfumed oils and feathered fans. A room with silence. A room without dust. A bed that doesn't leave splinters in your spine. And then you shake the thought away. That world isn't yours. It never was. You were born to the dust. The rope, the rhythm of the hammer, and the slow song of the stone. A rustle beside you breaks the stillness. Someone rising to use the latrine trench, barefoot and bleary-eyed. You close your eyes again, this time with more weight. Your body begins to forget its pain, one limb at a time. Your hands stop twitching. Your jaw unclenches. Your breathing slows. You're not sure if the dreams that follow are real. Maybe you're back in your village, sitting beside your brother under the tamarisk tree. Maybe you're in the Nile, waist deep, catching fish with your bare hands. Or maybe you're standing atop the pyramid, looking out over the whole desert, and the wind isn't hot, but cool, sweet, and free. The barracks breathe around you, a shared rhythm of exhaustion and survival. No one speaks now. Even the snores have softened. The oil lamps burn low, throwing sleepy shadows that stretch and fade across the walls. Outside, the stars keep watch. The pyramid waits for you again. But not yet. For now, you sleep beneath a low roof with 100 other bone-weary men, shoulder to shoulder, ache to ache, held together by dust, sweat, and the simple hope that tomorrow won't be worse than today. The first sound you hear in the morning isn't birdsong or the rustle of wind through date palms. It's the shrill snap of the overseer's whistle, cutting through the darkness like a blade. It's not even fully light outside. A dull gray seeps in from the horizon, just enough to turn shadows into shapes and shapes into faces. All around you, the barracks are coming alive in the worst possible way. Groans, curses, bodies rolling stiffly from mats, the shuffling of bare feet over cold, compacted earth. You sit up with the grace of a broken statue. Your spine protests, your calves cramp, and your neck feels like it spent the night trying to twist itself into a knot. There's no gentle waking here. No time to stretch or gather your thoughts. The whistle means up. The whistle means now. You fumble for your sandals, still damp with yesterday's sweat, and wrap the frayed linen around your waist with practiced slowness, delaying the inevitable. A few men are already out the door. Others linger, rubbing their faces or tending to blisters that look worse in the morning light. No one speaks much. It's too early for words, and besides, you all know what's waiting outside. The air is cooler than yesterday, but not by much. It's the kind of morning that tricks you into thinking you might not sweat through your tunic by noon, but you will. You always do. You step out into the dusty yard as the rest of the camp stirs, the sky now tinged with a pale pink hue. Fires sputter at the cook stations, and the bread ovens have already begun belching smoke. The overseer paces along the edge of the compound, like a general surveying a battlefield, his whistle hanging from his neck like an amulet of dread. Breakfast is the same as always, a small hunk of dry barley bread and a swallow of yesterday's beer. You chew without tasting, focused more on not choking than on flavor. The bread scrapes your throat on the way down, and the beer is too sour to enjoy, but it does enough to wake your stomach. Around you, others eat in silence, leaning on walls or crouching in the dust. The only real conversation is in eye contact, silent exchanges that say, "Ready?" or "Not yet," or "Let's just get through this." Then the whistle blows again, sharp and impatient. Time to move. You fall into line with the others, heading down the familiar path toward the day's assignment. The same dust swirls around your feet. The same sun creeps up the eastern sky. The same weight settles on your shoulders before you've lifted a single rope. Today, you're back on hauling duty. Not the glamorous kind that moves the final block into place. No, you're moving freshly quarried stone from the edge of the site to the shaping area, a stretch of uneven ground peppered with loose debris and half-buried tools. The sledges are already lined up, each one waiting like a beast that knows it's going to be beaten. You and your team take your positions without instruction. The overseer doesn't need to explain anything. His job is to blow the whistle and shout if you're too slow. You grab your section of rope again. It's rougher than yesterday, and your hands are already raw, but the motion comes back easily. Your body remembers the angles. The push, the pull, the subtle bend of the knees that keeps your spine from snapping under the pressure. You've learned these things by necessity. There's no training here. You just keep doing it until you stop making mistakes, or until the mistakes stop you. The work begins with a heave, a grunt, and the familiar groan of the sledge shifting forward. The team moves as one unit, legs straining, backs tight, heads down. The rhythm is brutal but steady. The overseer walks alongside, silent for once, watching every step. His eyes scan for weakness. A stumble, a lag, a sign that someone might not keep up. If he sees it, the whistle comes back out. That short, shrill blast. That terrible sound that means faster. You hate that sound. Everyone does. It's not just the noise, it's what it represents. That you're not moving fast enough. That the schedule is slipping. That the Pharaoh's vision is more important than your legs. It doesn't matter that the stone weighs a dozen men. It doesn't matter that the sun is rising like a fiery curse. The whistle doesn't care. The whistle only knows the plan. The plan, of course, comes from men you'll never meet. Men who wear linen so fine it floats in the breeze. Men who speak in hushed voices about symmetry, celestial alignments, and divine purpose. They stand far above you, both literally and figuratively, scribbling on papyrus scrolls while your fingernails turn black from straying. And the overseer, his job is to bridge that gap, not with words, but with that whistle, that signal, that relentless reminder. The sun climbs, the sweat returns. Your shirt clings to you like wet bark. You lose track of how many stones you've moved. One blends into the next, like waves on a shore. You pause only when allowed, resting with your hands on your knees, sucking air through cracked lips, ignoring the way your shoulders tremble from overuse. Breaks are short. Always. Just enough time to catch your breath before the whistle calls you back. You wonder if the overseer ever gets tired. He doesn't show it. He paces, he watches, he whistles. That's his whole life. Maybe he doesn't think about you as a person. Maybe he's forgotten how to see individuals. Maybe, in his mind, you're just another pair of feet hauling a rock that will outlive you by thousands of years. Sometimes you see a flicker of something in his face. Not pity, not cruelty, just distance. A gap too wide to cross. You wonder what he dreams about, if he dreams at all. Does he hear the whistle in his sleep? Do you? By late afternoon, the wind picks up, carrying grit through the worksite in biting gusts. It stings your face and gets in your eyes, your mouth. You spit and wipe your brow, blinking rapidly. The overseer lifts his robe to shield his own face and blows the whistle again. It's fainter this time, muffled by the wind. But everyone still hears it. You all move anyway. One of the younger boys stumbles during the next haul. The sledge jerks to one side, nearly throwing two men off balance. The overseer storms over, barking something you can't quite hear over the wind, gesturing wildly. The boy apologizes without raising his head. He looks about 14. Thin, scared, and covered in so much dust, he looks like a statue of himself. The overseer steps back and mercifully says nothing more. The boy resumes his position. The sledge moves on, and you move with it, because that's what you do. The whistle may sleep in the brief hours between dusk and dawn, but its rhythm echoes through the day like a heartbeat you can't escape. It sets the pace. It determines when you rest, when you eat, when you work. In some twisted way, it keeps you alive. Without it, there would be chaos. But with it, there's just order and exhaustion. Eventually, the whistle falls silent again, signaling the day's end. You let go of the rope with a sigh that feels deeper than it should. Your hands burn. Your arms ache. But there's relief in the stillness. A fragile, fleeting moment when no one's shouting, no one's pulling, and no one's being timed like an ox at market. You walk back to camp with the others, dust in your throat, your steps dragging. The pyramid looms behind you, casting a long shadow across the desert. Somewhere, another overseer is still blowing his whistle. Somewhere, another team is still pulling. But your part is done for today. And tomorrow, it will begin again. Same sun, same stone, same whistle, and somehow you'll answer it. Because that's what workers do. The morning begins like all others, under a dull sky that offers no comfort, stirred awake not by choice, but by command. The whistle's piercing note cuts through the barracks before the light has fully touched the desert. And once again, your body moves before your mind does. As you walk through the familiar routine, donning the same stiff tunic, wrapping the same length of linen around your waist, you feel a dull weight in your chest, something heavier than muscle fatigue. It's not just the ache in your legs or the tenderness of your palms. It's the slow, creeping knowledge that you are building something whose glory will never belong to you. You see it as you step into the workyard, towering above the haze of morning. The pyramid, no longer just an idea or a blueprint, now casts long shadows across the desert floor. It rises in silent judgment, perfectly tiered, flawlessly shaped, each level demanding more than the last. From this distance, the structure looks immovable and eternal. You know how deceptive that is. You know the creaking of sledges, the constant failure of ropes, the groans of men beneath weight not meant to be borne by the human frame. From the base, it is no longer a monument. It is a mountain under construction, demanding tribute from flesh and bone. Your team is assigned to ramp duty today. The new stones must be dragged to the next level of the ascending platform, each block heavier than memory, each movement slower than the last. The ramp, once a gentle slope, has grown crueler with each layer. The incline steals energy like a thief in the night, forcing you to lean harder, pull lower, and brace your weight against every forward step. The rope leaves a red band around your palms, reopening scabs that haven't had time to heal. Your breath comes in bursts, your shoulders tremble, and the stone barely seems to move at all. At the top of the ramp, workers guide the incoming blocks into place, smoothing the mortar and aligning the corners with chalk lines and gestures. The overseers stand above them, arms folded, calling out corrections that make little sense from below. From your angle, the entire pyramid appears to lean forward as though waiting to devour the next offering. You hear men muttering around you, some praying under their breath, others cursing without heat. No one talks about the structure anymore as something noble. It is a machine, and you are the fuel. At midday, your group stops briefly to drink from shared jars of warm, cloudy water. The break is short, and even in stillness, the pain doesn't fade. One man massages his lower back with slow circles, his mouth tight with concentration. Another sits on a stone block and closes his eyes, as if trying to remember what life felt like before this. You sit too, though not out of choice. Your knees have begun to tremble without warning, and you worry that if you keep standing, you might simply fall. In moments like these, you find your gaze drawn upward. The pyramid now blocks part of the sky, a slab of carved ambition rising into the pale heavens. There is no ornament yet, no gold at the peak, no carved inscription declaring its purpose. And still, everyone knows what it is. It is the Pharaoh's claim to eternity, shaped from the toil of thousands, built on backs that no one will name. You think of the men who died already, those crushed by falling blocks, or who collapsed in the quarry and never woke. Their names are not recorded. Their families receive no compensation. Their bones might lie beneath the very ramp you haul upon, buried in silence so the work can continue without disruption. The truth is impossible to ignore now. This pyramid is not for you. It never was. You will never climb its polished outer stones in triumph. You will never walk its cool inner corridors, nor rest in the chambers where sacred statues and golden artifacts will one day be stored. That privilege belongs to a single man, a king whose voice echoes only in orders, whose needs are drawn in ink, and whose soul will one day ascend along the very angles you have carved into reality. The injustice doesn't burn anymore. It just settles. It becomes part of the routine. You work because there is no alternative. You pull because others pull beside you. You sweat, not in defiance, but because your body has learned no other language. You tell yourself that maybe, one day, someone will look upon this monument and wonder who you were. Maybe they'll find a mark you left in the mortar, a scratch in a stone, a whisper hidden in the pattern of the bricks. Maybe that will be enough. As the day ends, the sun throws long orange lines across the ramp. You walk slowly back toward the barracks, your arms limp, your sandals trailing thin clouds of dust. You glance back once more at the pyramid, its silhouette sharp against the fading light. In this hour, it almost seems alive, its edges glowing faintly, its structure too symmetrical to be accidental, too massive to be human. And yet, you know what built it. You know whose hands placed each stone. Not God's, not Pharaoh's, yours. You walk in silence, and as the camp comes into view, your mind begins to drift. You've never seen the plans. You've never heard the prayers uttered in the inner chambers. But there is one man who has. One man who sees what you do not. He stands far from the quarry, high above the chaos, surrounded by scrolls and servants, tracing lines on papyrus that become your suffering. His name is spoken with reverence, though you've never seen his face. Hemiunu, the architect, the builder of dreams. And while your hands carry stone, his hands shape destiny. Far from the dust and shouting, in a villa shaded by date palms and flanked by shallow pools of still water, a boy sits beneath a columned portico, struggling to keep his scrolls from curling in the breeze. He is perhaps 10 years old, wiry, barefoot, his knees scratched from climbing where he shouldn't, and his hair in a constant state of disorder that no amount of combing seems to fix. His name is Hemiunu, son of noble blood, born into a life measured in cubits, not calluses. While boys elsewhere swing hammers and chase goats through sunburnt alleys, he measures shadows and learns the names of stars. The sunlight filters gently through the latticed ceiling, scattering light over the polished limestone tiles where his teacher sits cross-legged, speaking slowly, evenly, with the kind of voice meant for long days and slow learners. Hemiunu is neither. He listens well, understands quickly, and already speaks of angles and boundaries in ways that make the tutor pause. But he's impatient too. His hands itch to draw, to build, to take the theories on papyrus and pin them to the real world. Today, he's distracted, watching a servant refill the reflecting pool, fascinated not by the servant, but by the ripples, how they spread, how they reflect the columns in warping perfection. His grandfather was a vizier, his father, a priest of high rank. The expectation is clear. Hemiunu will rise. He will advise kings. He will command projects. But expectations alone do not explain his hunger. Even as a child, He seeks out structure, not just in architecture but in thought. He asks why the stars move the way they do, why some tombs align with Orion's belt, and why others don't. He is scolded gently when his questions stray too far from the sacred explanations, but the curiosity never leaves him. In truth, it only deepens. When lessons end, Hemiunu roams. He visits the workshops where his father's masons carve temple friezes and hieroglyphic reliefs. He watches, silent, as the craftsmen work with stone, bronze, and reed brushes. He pays more attention than anyone expects. Later, back at the villa, he arranges pebbles in rows, drawing diagrams in the dirt. He talks to himself in numbers, testing how walls might curve, how ramps might rise without collapse. He sketches towers that reach absurd heights, structures no adult would consider stable, much less buildable. But what marks him is not just imagination, it's restraint. Even at 12, he begins correcting himself, identifying flaws before others point them out. By adolescence, he is already surrounded by scrolls, mathematical treatises, star maps, measurements of old temple grounds. He pores over them by torchlight, long after others sleep, not because he must, but because he wants to know. Knowledge is not just a tool to him, it is a way to navigate a world that constantly measures men against their usefulness. For Hemiunu, every answer uncovers a better question, and each morning he wakes with something new to solve. His mother watches all this with a quiet mixture of pride and concern. She sees his restlessness, how little he speaks at family gatherings, how his fingers twitch when forced to sit still for too long. She fears, perhaps, that he may become too clever for his own good. But his father sees something else: potential, precision, promise. He brings Hemiunu to the temple archives, where aged priests whisper about sacred geometry and the numerical truths behind the gods. The boy listens, nods respectfully, and then, once they leave, explains to his father where the calculations fall short. As he matures, Hemiunu grows tall, slender at first, but with a presence that fills rooms. He speaks less in questions now, more in statements, quiet, certain, always thought through. He writes constantly. Not poetry, not prayers, but diagrams, layouts, alternative solutions to existing problems. When a noble's tomb floods due to poor placement near a seasonal runoff, it is Hemiunu who quietly suggests a raised foundation and an east-facing drainage path. When a granary begins to sag inward, he redesigns its load-bearing columns using a taper that mimics the curve of a lotus stalk. By the time he reaches his late teens, his name is passed along corridors in hushed tones. He is still too young to sit in council, but older men request his insights discreetly, as though borrowing from the mind of a scribe, instead of deferring to a future vizier. Hemiunu never boasts. He doesn't need to. His clarity of thought does it for him. And yet, for all his intellect, he still walks barefoot in the courtyard when he thinks. He still traces spirals in the sand with the end of a reed. He still looks up at night and wonders what holds the stars in place. While others his age obsess over robes and ranks, he is drawn to ideas, to the tension between ambition and structure. He believes everything has an order, even chaos, if you look closely enough. Eventually, the court takes formal notice. He is summoned to sit in on a planning council for the Temple of Hathor, not as a full participant, but as a silent observer. But silence is not something Hemiunu maintains easily when the proposed design reveals a flaw in elevation that would cause the facade to lean inward. When he speaks, it is without hesitation, but with courtesy. The architects are embarrassed, but not offended. His correction is precise and politely delivered. The plan is altered. From that moment, he is no longer merely the prodigy son of powerful parents. He becomes necessary. By his early 20s, Hemiunu walks the palace halls with a stylus tucked behind his ear and dust on his robes, not from neglect, but from site visits. He has opinions about materials, slope, weathering, even how the Nile's flooding season will affect supply chains. The palace officials begin consulting him not just on building plans, but on logistics, budgeting, even worker rotations. He understands the system better than the men who run it, and he respects it even as he reshapes it. What he cannot stand is inefficiency. What he despises is waste. Still, there are things he has yet to learn about politics, about power, about how ideas are not always enough when they threaten someone else's authority. He begins to see the difference between solving a problem and navigating one. He watches how men in robes say one thing and mean another, how courtiers smile while quietly removing rivals from favor. He watches and listens, but he does not yet act. He files the lessons away like measurements on a scroll, waiting for the moment when they will matter. And that moment is coming. Soon, the Pharaoh will issue a command, not a suggestion, not a polite vision, but a divine directive to raise the greatest monument the world has ever seen. A structure not just for burial, but for legacy. A shape so perfect it will bend time. The pyramid. When the order comes, it will not go to a priest or a soldier, or even a seasoned builder. It will go to Hemiunu, because while others dream in gold and limestone, he has already built the pyramid 100 times, in his scrolls, in his sleep, in his restless, ever-measuring mind. The summons arrives without ceremony. A folded strip of parchment carried by a royal servant, handed over in silence and sealed with the pharaoh's personal stamp. An ibis perched up a sun disk, unmistakable and absolute. Hemiunu doesn't need to open it to know what it means. He's been expecting this. The Great One has decided. The pyramid will rise, and it will be Hemiunu who makes it so. When he steps into the pharaoh's audience hall for the first time as chief architect and royal vizier, he walks not as a servant, but as a man with a responsibility so vast, it could crush most men flat. The floor beneath him is polished to a gleam, a reflection so clean, it almost distracts from the incense clouding the air in perfumed swirls. High above, gilded panels catch the light and throw it across the chamber like scattered stars. Priests and advisors stand along the walls, their faces impassive, their silence a shield. No one speaks unless spoken to in this room. Power does not raise its voice here. It does not need to. Khufu, the Pharaoh, sits elevated at the far end beneath a canopy of dyed linen, his skin painted with a reddish tint of sacred cosmetics, his eyes lined with kohl so they appear half-lidded and unknowable. He does not rise. He never does. Men rise for him. He does not smile. He does not frown. His gaze settles on Hemiunu with a calm that reads more like calculation than welcome. To look into those eyes is to understand what it means to carry a god's ambition on mortal shoulders. The meeting is short. It always is. The Pharaoh speaks softly, and others repeat his words for him. The plan is clear. The tomb must be unlike any before it, monolithic, exact, eternal. The burial chamber must rest above ground, not below, where no waters can rise to defile it. The passageways must be precise enough for the soul to travel, the angles sacred, the alignment perfect. And all of it must be complete before the sun sets on Khufu's final breath. Hemiunu nods as the list is given, committing every detail to memory, already calculating, already unraveling the implications. He asks no questions. This is not the place for questions. Questions belong to lower halls, to open scrolls and marked diagrams. Here, in this perfumed chamber, only certainty may speak. He bows once and leaves. Outside the court, the work begins. Hemiunu does not sit in a chamber indelicate. He walks. He watches. He speaks to stonecutters, scribes, overseers, and priests. He does not shout. His words are quiet but firm, and people listen. Because behind every request lies a mind that already sees 5 steps ahead. He can describe the gradient of a ramp before the land is cleared. He can sketch the placement of internal chambers without lifting his stylus. He can walk a plot of ground and know instinctively which corner will settle and which will sag. But it is the court that tests him in different ways. It is not just stone and sun that resist movement. It is men. Ambitious men, envious men. There are whispers in the palace that Hemiunu has risen too quickly, that his lineage is not strong enough to command the loyalty of older, land-owning families. Some say he has the Pharaoh's ear, not because of brilliance, but because of his blood. Nepotism, they murmur. Or worse, manipulation. Yet none of them can point to a single miscalculation, a single failed project. His numbers are flawless. His labor quotas balanced. His construction timelines aggressive, but somehow realistic. Still, whispers persist. And that's what makes the meetings with Khufu so delicate. They are never long, never loud, but they are frequent, far more than most courtiers receive. Hemiunu stands at the edge of the throne room, or walks beside the royal litter as it crosses the palace gardens. Sometimes the Pharaoh speaks of the project. Sometimes he does not speak at all. But Hemiunu has learned to read the silences. The way a hand rests too long on an armrest. The way a single raised eyebrow can signal months of additional labor. In these moments, Hemiunu is not just an architect. He is a translator, a whisperer of unspoken intent. He begins to understand what the pyramid truly represents. Not just a tomb, but a declaration. A political and cosmic statement that Khufu is not just ruler of Egypt, but master of time, order, and permanence. The pyramid must humble all who see it. It must break the horizon. It must outlive the winds and wear the centuries like a garment. That weight does not rest on the Pharaoh's shoulders. It rests on Hemiunu's. He learns to speak carefully, even in private, to couch suggestions inside praises, to deliver bad news with offers of solutions already prepared. He becomes, in essence, two men. One who drafts and calculates, and one who survives the firelit corridors of royal favor. Both are necessary. Neither can falter. And yet, there are moments when even he doubts. When the scale of what's being asked seems too vast. When the stones required outweigh the capacity of 10,000 men. When a single misalignment could skew the entire angle of a face and reduce divine geometry to embarrassing failure. In those hours, he does not turn to priests or advisors. He returns to his scrolls, to the comfort of ratios and right angles, to the belief that logic, if applied correctly, can conquer anything, even death. The workers do not know his name, not most of them. He is a rumor, a distant figure said to walk with kings and speak the language of stars. But some have seen him on the site, his robes dusty, his sandals worn, kneeling in the sand to measure shadow lengths and slope gradients. They whisper about that too, not in scorn, but in surprise. That a man with power chooses to walk where the stones are moved. It is not humility that brings him there. It is precision. He does not trust the reports. He must feel the soil himself. He must hear the creak of the sledges, watch the shadows fall along the pyramid's base. He is not building a tomb. He is building the afterlife. But as the weeks become months, and the ramp snakes longer across the sand, and the stones begin their slow, eternal rise into the desert sky, Hemiunu begins to feel something else creeping in. Not doubt, not fear. Something quieter. A distance between himself and the men below. A recognition that every decision he makes, on scheduling, on gradient, on labor, translates into the aches and blisters of thousands. He does not stop the work. He does not soften the plan. But he carries that weight differently now. Because when you whisper to kings, the echoes do not stop at the throne. They roll downhill. And at the bottom of the hill is a worker, bent beneath a stone, hearing the distant sound of a whistle. There are no late pyramids. That is the first and most unshakable truth. Hemiunu learns once the initial excitement of royal favor wears off. The deadline is not penciled in by stonecutters or courtiers. It's written in the sky. When a pharaoh declares that his soul will rise with the stars, it becomes the architect's burden to make sure the stone rises first. The heavens don't wait, neither does the king. And so, Hemiunu's measurements extend beyond the land. He begins each morning not just with a scroll, but with a look at the sky. He consults the priest astronomers, men who speak in riddles about sacred alignments and cosmic harmony. They tell him when the dog star will appear again. They show him where Orion's belt will fall at midwinter. These, they say, are the signs that must be honored. The burial chamber must face true north. The entrance corridor must receive light from the rising sun on a specific day. The outer casing must gleam under the right constellations so that the pharaoh's soul knows where to go. At first, Hemiunu is skeptical. He trusts numbers more than omens. But as he watches the night sky shift, season after season, he begins to see a logic in it. The stars move with a patience that mocks human urgency. Their patterns are maddeningly consistent, always slightly off from what one expects, yet entirely predictable if studied long enough. And so he learns. He watches. He takes notes by torchlight, marking the angle of a star's rise, the length of its appearance, the shadow it casts on a staff plunged into packed earth. These observations shape the entire build, the placement of the base, the angle of each face, even the timing of stone deliveries. When the priests declare that the sacred calendar has reached a critical turning, everything must stop or accelerate. It doesn't matter if the crews are ready, if the sledges are groaning, if the workers are begging for rest. The stars decide. The pharaoh's legacy depends on obedience to a sky that cares nothing for human bones. Hemiunu finds himself in conflict more often now. The priests insist on certain rituals before the laying of foundation stones. The overseers, grumbling from their maps and lists, argue that the labor force can't work through the flooding season. And the palace scribes remind him daily that the budget is not infinite, that too much limestone is vanishing into ramps and scaffolds instead of walls and chambers. Caught between all of them, Hemiunu does not flinch. He redraws schedules with cold precision. He reroutes supply paths to avoid flooded roads. He breaks the work into zones, each tied to a lunar cycle or a sacred feast. Every decision he makes must answer to two masters, the demands of divine symmetry and the limits of human endurance. He studies the ancient builders who came before him, reviewing diagrams of earlier pyramids and royal tombs. He notes their failures, the unstable angles, the cracked chambers, the misaligned corridors that betray a rushed finish or a misread constellation. He will not make those mistakes. The pyramid of Khufu will not lean. It will not buckle. It will not deviate one cubit from the lines inscribed in the night. Still, the sky remains unpredictable in its own way. Dust storms cloud the horizon. Floodwaters linger longer than expected. Some nights, the stars are hidden altogether. Hemiunu adapts. He learns to triangulate with shadows at dawn. He commissions polished copper tools that reflect starlight more clearly, marking points on limestone with the help of his most trusted scribes. They become his second eyes, his extensions. He begins to think of the build as an argument with the sky, and one he intends to win. But the stress shows. His appetite wanes. His robes hang more loosely now. He sleeps less, dreams in numbers, wakes with the weight of yet another recalculation pressing against his ribs. He no longer visits the palace for social events. He no longer joins temple ceremonies unless his presence is required. His world has shrunk to a single point of rising geometry and falling deadlines. And overhead, the stars march on. He meets with the Pharaoh more often now. Short meetings, never relaxed. Khufu does not ask how Hemiunu is faring. He asks how the work is progressing. When the inner chamber will be sealed. When the outer casing will begin. He speaks of eternity like a man checking the weather. But Hemiunu answers each question with clarity. He never admits uncertainty. He never speaks of delays. In the privacy of his study, he calculates again, checks the star charts, cross-references the angles. He finds solutions. Always, and yet, he wonders. Not aloud, but in the back of his mind. Historians still wonder if the pyramid's alignment was truly sacred, or simply practical. Whether the orientation to true north was the result of divine intent or astronomical obsession. Hemiunu knows it is both. The pharaoh must believe in the divine. The builder must obey the measurable. And somewhere in that intersection lies truth. He walks the site by moonlight sometimes. Just him, a guard or two, and the stars above. The pyramid glows faintly in the pale light, its steps sharp and proud. He runs his hand along the stones and listens to the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the weight of it, the feeling that this place is being watched, judged. Not just by the king or the priests or the future generations who might uncover its secrets, but by the stars themselves. He does not fear failure, but he does fear imprecision. He fears that if a single face of the pyramid is off by a degree, the pharaoh's soul may wander. That if the chamber is placed a handbreadth too low, eternity might slip sideways. That if the angle of the ascending passage is even slightly wrong, it might all unravel, not just in stone, but in memory. And so he returns to his scrolls, to the stars, to the long, dry language of symmetry and faith. He speaks to no one for hours at a time. His assistants begin to worry, but he brushes them off. The night sky is clear again. A rare gift. He climbs a scaffold and marks the lines himself, his fingers steady even as the wind rises. The stars blink above him, distant and cold. They don't care about timelines, but he does. Because in the end, the stones will stay where he places them. But the stars, they move only once. The desert looks flat to the naked eye, but Hemiunu knows better. The land ripples in ways that only a surveyor can see. Minuscule rises, hidden hollows, pockets of sand that settle unevenly, no matter how many workers stamp them down. Before a single block can be placed, before the ramp can be raised or the limestone hauled, the ground itself must be understood. The pyramid cannot be guessed into place. It must be planted like a seed in a bed of absolute precision. Hemiunu stands with his lead surveyor at the edge of the construction site, his sandals half buried in sand that has already been marked with rows of colored cords. Behind him, a team of assistants holds taut ropes, aligns poles with copper weights, and measures sun angles with tools polished to a dull shine. The entire site hums with quiet tension. This isn't just math anymore. It's ritual, memory, and intuition, all tied into one. And in the middle of it, Hemiunu watches the shadows shift like language. He holds a plumb line between his fingers, its weight swaying gently as he tests the vertical alignment of a boundary stone. The line settles, true and unwavering. But he doesn't move on. He stares at it a little longer, then shifts a half step to the left and checks again. Everything must be symmetrical, not just to please the eye, but to honor the rules set by both gods and geometry. A single deviation at the base can multiply tenfold by the time it reaches the pyramid's peak. Hemiunu has no tolerance for such errors. He's seen what happens when survey lines betray their creators. Collapsed shrines, tilted walls, cracked ceilings. The gods do not smile on structures that lean. In truth, he no longer trusts the old maps. Some were drawn with too much reverence and not enough accuracy. Others were copied from older scrolls that were themselves filled with cautious approximations. Hemiunu wants more than that. He wants certainty. And so, day by day, he recreates the ground beneath him. He assigns his best minds to the task, rotating them between measuring posts at sunrise and recalibrating lengths with knotted cords at dusk. The site becomes a living grid, stone markers, torch positions, carefully spaced pegs. The workers call it the web. They don't understand all the marks, but they know not to disturb them. Men joke that Hemiunu could measure the wingspan of a fly if it held still long enough. Some whisper that he's gone too deep into his own designs, that he dreams in angles now, that he sees geometry even in his sleep. And maybe that's not far from the truth. Even his handwriting has changed, letters tighter, more compact, measured as if every character were a stone in its own miniature structure. At night, he walks the lines again, sometimes alone, sometimes with one of his apprentices. They ask questions, why this angle, why that ratio, and he answers without hesitation. These walks become more than instruction. They are confessions of a kind. He speaks of balance, of proportion, of how harmony in architecture reflects harmony in the soul. He explains why each side of the pyramid must be equal to the others, not just in length, but in spirit. The west cannot dominate the east. The north must bow to the sky. Everything must breathe together. There are secrets in the survey lines, not hidden messages or mystical curses, but truth so subtle they go unnoticed by most. Hemiunu knows that even the best tools warp under heat. That rope stretches, that the earth shifts, and so he compensates, adds tiny corrections, imperceptible adjustments. A marker moved a hand's width north, a base platform raised by half a finger's breadth. He does not write these changes down. They live only in his mind, carried from morning to evening, adjusted as needed, never shared. These are his margins, his silences, the quiet math behind the public success. Even the foundation of the pyramid itself is not entirely level, though only Hemiunu and a few others know this. One corner sits slightly lower, allowing for runoff during the rare floods that reach this high into the plateau. Another is reinforced with denser stone to absorb pressure from the prevailing winds. These imperfections are deliberate, embedded within a larger symmetry, so precise that the adjustments disappear into harmony. It's not about making it flawless. It's about making it last. Still, not all questions have answers. Hemiunu sometimes wakes at night wondering if his measurements will hold. He replays angles in his mind, recalculates distances he already knows by heart. Historians still wonder how he achieved such precision without modern instruments. They marvel at the leveling of the ground, the alignment with true north, the seamless joinery of blocks. Theories abound: shadow clocks, water levels, alien intervention, depending on who you ask. But the truth is simpler, if less romantic. It was Hemiunu, and rope and sweat, and checking again and again and again, until the ground yielded to vision. Of course, not everyone sees it this way. The court cares more about pace than precision. The priests demand rituals at inopportune times, disrupting carefully scheduled survey days with chants and censors. Even some overseers grumble that the measuring takes too long. But Hemiunu does not yield. He knows what's at stake. This pyramid is not just stone on stone. It's a message to eternity. And every line in the sand must say something worth remembering. The workers continue building, unaware of the calculations humming beneath their feet. They place blocks according to orders, never questioning why some must be trimmed slightly, or why others are rejected entirely. They don't see the surveyors moving at night, adjusting markers by torchlight. They don't hear the scribes arguing over angle conversions at the edge of camp. All they know is that the pyramid is growing, and that somehow it always seems to rise straight. Hemiunu feels it too, that quiet sense of motion, that the thing he's building is no longer just his. It belongs to the world now, to history, to the sky. His survey lines are disappearing beneath blocks, buried forever under the very stones they guided. But he doesn't mind. That was always the plan. He needs no monument. His calculations will live on, even if his name fades. And still, he walks the lines one more time, the heel of his sandal brushing against a barely visible groove in the earth. He runs his hand over a newly placed marker and feels the alignment settle through his bones like a chord resolving into music. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The stones are listening. By the time Hemiunu reaches the outer hall of the palace, he already knows how this meeting will go. There will be no greeting, no invitation to sit, no courtesies exchanged. The guards part for him without speaking. The floor is freshly washed and still damp, the scent of lavender and lotus rising in clouds from the tiles. Through high windows, thin beams of sunlight pierce the shadows, making everything look more polished than it really is. In this place, appearance always trumps truth, and Hemiunu, master of measurements, has learned to account for that too. The Pharaoh is already in the chamber. He sits not on a throne today, but on a low dais surrounded by papyrus screens, the room muffled by the presence of silence itself. Incense burns in brass bowls beside him, the smoke rising in lazy spirals. Attendants linger nearby, still as statues, eyes downcast. No one speaks when Hemiunu enters. He walks with purpose, but not haste. Every step is calculated, not just in distance, but in deference. He does not bow immediately. Not here. Not until Khufu acknowledges him. And then, with the faintest flick of 2 fingers, the Pharaoh signals. Hemiunu bows deeply, slowly. He rises only when permitted. The air in the chamber is cool, unnaturally so, chilled by pots of evaporating water hidden behind woven screens. It's a small trick, but one that reinforces the sense of control. Khufu appears untouched by heat or hunger or time. His face is unreadable, his features sculpted into the permanent calm of one who never hears the word no. He gestures again, just once, and an attendant brings forward a scroll, places it before the vizier, and retreats without a word. The scroll is blank, a test. Hemiunu expected this. He takes the stylus handed to him and draws a swift series of lines. A ramp, a chamber, a load-bearing platform. His wrist is steady, his fingers practiced. He writes not in words, but in geometry. In truth, when he finishes, he waits. The Pharaoh studies the scroll in silence. His eyes do not flicker. His mouth does not move. Hemiunu does not speak unless asked. In this room, speech is not conversation. It is command or confession. And this meeting, like so many before it, is more a performance than an exchange. The Pharaoh does not need to know how every block is placed. He needs only to know that it will be. That Hemiunu will solve whatever needs solving, that no delays will come to his ears, and that the structure rising in his name will be worthy of his death. Sometimes the Pharaoh does speak. When he does, it is often in metaphor. He'll say, "The stars are watching," or "The tomb must sleep before the body," and leave Hemiunu to interpret what he means. Other times, he'll make an offhand remark about the Nile's flood, or a bad omen observed in a bird's flight, and somehow that translates into a change in workload or design. These are not discussions. They are declarations dressed as riddles. Hemiunu has learned to listen beneath the words. One day, the Pharaoh speaks only a single sentence. The chambers must breathe. No elaboration, no eye contact. Hemiunu bows and leaves, heart pounding. He spends the next 3 nights drafting a ventilation system using hidden shafts, sloped passages that will carry air through the heart of the pyramid, while doubling as spiritual guides to the stars. No one had ever built such a thing. No one else would have dared. But Hemiunu knows what the Pharaoh meant, even if the Pharaoh himself doesn't. It is not breath that is needed. It is permanence. The illusion of life continuing, even within death. These are ghost meetings. Appointments that exist half in silence, half in code. Sometimes they happen in the royal gardens at dusk, both men walking a step apart in the perfumed evening, passing torchlit columns without exchanging a single word. Sometimes they happen in rooms so private that even the scribes are turned away. No records are kept. No witnesses remain. Only instructions, barely spoken, left hanging like incense in the air. And always, the Pharaoh's eyes remained distant, focused not on Hemiunu, but on something beyond. The next world, perhaps, his own legacy, or simply the vision of a monument so vast that even gods must pause to take notice. Hemiunu sees it too, not with the same reverence, but with clarity. He sees the angles, the materials, the sequence of labor. He sees the hidden flaws and the impossible demands. He sees the danger of saying too much or too little, because it is not just the Pharaoh's pyramid that Hemiunu is building. It is the Pharaoh's silence. Every block laid, every chamber aligned, every ramp constructed is a reply to an unspoken order. It is a whisper in limestone. And slowly, the meetings change him. He begins to speak less in general, to weigh every sentence before it leaves his mouth. He corrects his scribes with gestures instead of words. He sends updates to the palace not with emotion, but with diagrams and measured figures. He becomes, to those beneath him, a presence rather than a person. The workers no longer approach him with questions. They look past him or around him. They sense what the Pharaoh already knows, that Hemiunu is no longer entirely reachable. He dreams of corridors now, endless passageways carved through sandstone, echoing with the sound of chisels. He sees himself walking them alone, torchlight flickering on smooth walls, the air growing thinner with each step. Sometimes the chambers open into stars. Sometimes they collapse behind him. He wakes before reaching the end. The pyramid rises higher each week. The scaffolds stretch into the sky like ladders meant to tempt the gods. With each layer, the margin for error narrows. The blocks must fit without resistance. The interior must remain perfectly aligned, even as the outer casing expands. There is no time for rework, no forgiveness from stone. And still, the Pharaoh calls for him. Shorter meetings now. A nod, a frown, a question that sounds more like a warning. Once, the Pharaoh leans close enough for Hemiunu to smell the myrrh on his skin and says, "Do not let it settle wrong." He doesn't say what it is. The pyramid? The kingdom? The soul? Hemiunu bows as always and walks away with a dozen new calculations in his head. He wonders, sometimes, if the Pharaoh will outlive the project. If all of this work will end with a body that arrives too soon or too late. The timelines tighten, the rituals expand, and Hemiunu, caught between the stars above and the man who claims to own them, continues his quiet dance. Because in the end, he doesn't need a legacy. He doesn't need his name carved on a monument. He doesn't even need thanks. He needs the blocks to hold, the air to flow, the whispers to be answered. He needs the pyramid to rise. The pyramid is nearly complete. From a distance, it appears finished, its steep flanks gleaming in the sun, its outline slicing against the blue of the sky, like a vision carved into the world by unseen hands. The outer casing, made of polished Tura limestone, is almost entirely in place. Its surface catches the morning light and hurls it back in radiant silence. Visitors from distant gnomes stop in the valley and squint upward, shielding their eyes, certain they are seeing something divine. From afar, it looks eternal. But Hemiunu knows better. He sees what others cannot. He knows every gap still to be filled, every stone that sits slightly proud and needs carving, every shaft unfinished behind those gleaming faces. He knows, too, that time is no longer a luxury. The Pharaoh has grown quieter, and not just in speech. His walk is slowed. His eyes stay fixed on the horizon during their rare conversations, as if he's already looking for the next world. No one dares speak of it directly, but Hemiunu hears the coughs, sees the servants exchanging glances. The pyramid must be ready, and soon. His life has become increasingly silent. At one time, his tent near the workers' camp bustled with scribes, architects, and assistants constantly seeking instruction. Now they need him less and less. The plans are drawn. The angles are set. The crews understand their roles. When problems arise, they solve them using the systems he put in place. He walks the site still, his sandals scuffing the ramps, his fingers brushing the edges of each block, like a man greeting old friends, but the work hums on without him. The pyramid, once his obsession, no longer needs him to grow. There is no triumph in this realization, only fatigue. His back aches in the morning, his fingers cramp at night, his appetite has dulled, and his dreams, once rich with invention, have thinned to quiet images of lines, corners, and stars that shift just out of reach. The boy who once marveled at scrolls beneath the villa's portico is now a man whose scrolls fill entire rooms, and who reads none of them for pleasure anymore. He is honored, yes, respected, feared even. When he walks through the administration halls, men step aside. When his seal appears on a scroll, orders are carried out without question. His name is whispered by junior architects like a spell, yet this reverence isolates more than it comforts. He eats his meals alone. He speaks to no one about his dreams. He writes letters to family members that go unanswered. The friends of his youth have faded into other roles, other cities, other lives. Some are dead. Some, perhaps worse, have become strangers. Sometimes he wonders what will remain when he is gone. The pyramid, certainly. The tomb beside it, his own, nearly finished now, smaller and more modest, but placed just close enough to be included in eternity's shadow. The Pharaoh granted that as a final favor, or perhaps as a reminder of service well rendered. But Hemiunu finds no peace in that gesture. He knows the pyramid will outlive them both. He knows that over centuries, his tomb will erode, and his name may fade into the stone, while the king's endures above in sun and starlight. There are no stelas bearing Hemiunu's deeds, no songs written in his name. The work is its own reward, or so he has told himself, over and over, until the phrase has lost all meaning. But now, with the sun lower each evening and the crews quieter each day, he finds himself walking the completed galleries of the pyramid not to inspect, but simply to listen, to feel. He runs his hand along the joints in the inner corridor, marveling again at how tightly the stones press together. He watches the torchlight dance along the sharp corners, listens to the echo of his footsteps beneath the ascending passage. He built this. He alone saw it before it existed. And yet, he has no one to share it with. His assistants try sometimes. One brings him honeyed bread. Another leaves a fresh scroll of poetry near his stool. They mean well, and he thanks them gently. But he no longer speaks much to anyone. His thoughts move faster in silence. His memories speak louder than voices now. One night, he climbs to the highest platform just before moonrise. The desert stretches in every direction, quiet and enormous. The pyramid below him falls into deep shadow. It feels less like stone and more like absence, like a mountain hollowed out by memory. He looks west, toward the necropolis, where a row of low mounds marks the tombs of overseers and scribes. In the darkness, they appear even smaller, forgotten. He closes his eyes and imagines what will happen next. The funeral procession, the sealing of the inner vault, the rituals, the offerings, the torches flickering through the descending passage. The great stone slid into place, and then nothing. A silence that will last longer than kingdoms. He wonders if the gods will come, if they care, if the soul of the king will rise on shafts he designed, guided by stars he measured, or if it will simply settle into darkness, like all things do. There are times he wants to write a message, not for the king or for his priests, but for the future. A line on a block, a symbol hidden in plain sight. Something to say, we were here. We built this. But he knows it's foolish. He knows the pyramid is not meant for voices like his. The only names that matter are carved in royal cartouches. Everyone else is dust. Still, he allows himself one indulgence. On a block near the southeast corner, just above the platform that leads to the causeway, he scratches a mark. Not a name, not a word, just a single perfect square, traced with a stylus into damp mortar before it's set. No one notices. It blends into the pattern. But Hemiunu knows it's there. It is enough. And now, as the final casing stones are prepared and the Pharaoh's household begins their private rituals, Hemiunu begins to retreat. He hands off more tasks. He spends his mornings in the archive tent, sorting scrolls and making copies. He responds to fewer requests. He lets the overseers handle the final phase. He begins to fade from the sight in the same way that unfinished lines disappear beneath new drawings, slowly, quietly, inevitably. When he does visit the base of the pyramid now, workers stop and stare, unsure whether to bow or keep moving. He nods faintly and walks past them without a word. He is not their leader anymore. He is their shadow. One evening, as he sits beneath a palm at the edge of the site, watching the sun settle behind the unfinished temple near the pyramid's foot, a boy passes him, young, barefoot, carrying a basket of tools. The boy looks up and pauses. Hemiunu says nothing. The boy stares at him, tilts his head slightly, and asks, "Did you build it?" Hemiunu considers the question. The thousands of men, the quarry teams, the priests, the overseers, the scribes, the Pharaoh, the stars. "I helped," he says. The boy nods and walks on. And with that, Hemiunu lets go. The next morning, he doesn't visit the site. He remains in his tent, finishing one last diagram. Not of the pyramid, but of the site that supports it. The ramps, the causeway, the burial grounds, the supply lines. He sketches not the legacy above ground, but the labor below. The real structure, the one that will never be gilded. Then he folds it and places it among his personal scrolls. Because someday, long after the winds bury the camps and scatter the stones, someone may return. And when they do, they will dig. They will find not gold, not treasure, but bones and bread ovens, tools and fire pits. And in that moment, the truth will rise, not in marble, but in clay. The story doesn't begin with a grand discovery. It begins with a misstep. A tourist, decades ago, wandering just off the usual path near the pyramids at Giza, scuffs the toe of her boot against a low mound of wind-blown earth. Nothing much, just a small dip in the sand, barely noticeable beneath the glaring Egyptian sun. But something about the way her foot slid, how the ground shifted in a way that didn't feel entirely natural, catches her attention. She calls over a guide. The guide frowns, brushes at the ground, and notices something just beneath the surface that doesn't quite belong. A few days later, archaeologists return to the spot. They arrive with the usual skepticism, expecting little more than an animal den or an old work trench filled with debris. But the sand gives way too easily. Underneath, they find a cluster of oddly placed stones, not random, not decorative, but structured. Intentional. There's order in the layout, and the lines that barely peek through the grit. They dig more, a little deeper. And there it is, a wall. Not a piece of the pyramid, not another tomb, but a low rectangular enclosure of mud brick, its surface scored with tiny depressions that once held plaster. More excavation follows, careful and deliberate, until an entire corner of a building emerges. Its foundation laid clean, its edges square. The kind of structure that doesn't belong to nobility or the dead. It's practical. Lived in, built for use, not glory. The air shifts. Excitement stirs in the archaeological community. This isn't a burial chamber. It's a settlement. A few weeks later, the site sprawls open like a story that's waited too long to be read. Brick by brick, layer by layer, the sand peels back to reveal rows of rectangular rooms. Hearths, red ovens, storage pits. Animal bones in neat piles. Bits of charcoal, broken pottery. Not the opulent fragments of palatial life, but the mundane leftovers of meals and chores in habit. It's not royal, it's ordinary. And that makes it extraordinary. Because for centuries, the question of who built the pyramids lived in the haze of speculation. Servants, some said, foreign captives, forced laborers under the whip. And always, the workers themselves had remained silent, buried, erased, their voices drowned beneath the echo of the kings. But now, finally, here was something else. A different kind of monument. One not built of stone and boasting, but of fire pits and fish bones and burnt grain. A workers' village. The discovery stuns the archaeological world. Soon the dig site becomes a buzz of controlled chaos. Teams from multiple countries arrive with notebooks, cameras, brushes, and cautious hope. As they sift through the sand, they find walls reinforced with gypsum plaster, offering rare clues to interior space usage. In one corner, a shallow ditch reveals pottery shards mixed with fish scales, suggesting a kitchen. Nearby, a set of sleeping platforms, raised mounds of earth once covered with reed mats, give shape to daily rest. The rooms are small, but orderly, efficient. Someone lived here, slept, cooked, laughed, perhaps. Certainly, they worked. And then come the bones. Human remains begin to surface, partial skeletons, often incomplete, but enough to tell a story. They aren't buried with ceremony. No gilded masks, no spells etched on linen wrappings. Just bones, worn and humble, curled where they fell. A few are found with tools nearby, chisels, hammers, the ironstone pounders used in quarry work. Some bodies show signs of healed injuries, fractured ribs that reknitted over time, shattered limbs that somehow mended. There are spinal deformities too, compressed vertebrae, strange joints, shoulders permanently hunched. This isn't just a burial site. It's evidence of a workforce, a community. Suddenly, theories begin to unravel. The idea that the pyramid builders were servants loses ground fast. These people, whoever they were, ate well. They had access to meat, cattle, sheep, even fish from the Nile. They had communal kitchens large enough to serve hundreds. Their housing was stable, clean, deliberately constructed. And they weren't disposable. The presence of healing wounds, of bones that mended, suggests something rarely acknowledged in stories about ancient labor. Care. Someone tended to these workers. Someone brought them food when they couldn't walk. Someone set their limbs and kept them alive through recovery. Not luxury, not comfort, but something more than cruelty. Archaeologists move carefully, preserving every layer of ash, every stone groove. They log each artifact meticulously, building a new picture of life beneath the pyramid. The tools are practical. The pottery is undecorated. But once in a while, something curious turns up, a bit of graffiti on a fragment of wall plaster, scratched in with the tip of a nail. A drawing of a man pulling a sledge, exaggerated muscles straining. Another shows what appears to be a cat, lounging beside a pile of bread. It's crude and charming, and utterly human. In these tiny moments, the workers come to life. You can almost hear them. The man who worked on block shaping and brought home limestone dust in his hair. The woman who baked barley loaves and scolded boys for stealing dates. The boy who fed donkeys and secretly scratched drawings when he should have been working. They are gone, but their lives remain, layered in soot and sand and carefully preserved waste pits. The researchers begin calling the site the Pyramid Town. Some prefer the Workers' Village. Officially, it becomes part of the larger Giza Plateau mapping project. But to those walking the pathways between half-walls and hearths, it feels like something more intimate. A diary written not in words, but in food scraps and footprints. And as the work continues, as brush meets brick, the modern world leans closer. The story spreads. Journalists arrive, cameras in tow. Visitors peer over ropes and scaffolding. Schoolchildren squint at the layout maps, astonished that ordinary people built something so vast. That behind the Pharaoh's eternal tomb was a camp full of sweaty, laughing, limping human beings. That a monument we once believed to be the work of gods was, in truth, the work of hands. Hands like ours. And yet, the mystery remains incomplete. The excavated village is only a fragment. The majority still lies buried beneath centuries of wind-blown sand. What other chambers remain hidden? What names? What tools? What moments of joy or grief pressed into the layers waiting for a brush to find them? The wind howls across the site as the sun begins to set, turning the walls gold and the dig pits into pools of shadow. The archaeologists pack their tools. Another day done, another layer peeled away. But there's more. Always more. History doesn't shout. It murmurs beneath your feet, waiting for someone to listen. And all it took, in the end, was one misplaced step. The further archaeologists dig, the clearer the picture becomes, not just of how the workers lived, but of how deliberately their lives were supported. What at first looked like a series of rubble-filled chambers and utility sheds reveals itself to be something far more sophisticated. The village wasn't an afterthought. It was engineered, planned, constructed with intention, not merely to house laborers, but to sustain them. And at the heart of this infrastructure was food, fire, flour, and fermentation. Bread, beer, and bones. They begin uncovering ovens. Dozens of them. Round, clay-lined pits blackened with centuries of soot. Some with fragments of half-burnt grain still clinging to the edges. These weren't the occasional fire pits of a camp. This was industrial-scale baking. Rows of ovens, each wide enough to fit a man's torso, aligned along narrow alleys with drainage channels dug alongside. At first glance, it seems excessive. But when the number of workers is considered, hundreds, perhaps thousands, it makes sense. This village was not a temporary solution. It was a supply engine, designed to feed a small city every single day. Bread was the staple. Barley, sometimes emmer wheat, coarsely ground, often mixed with sand that found its way in from the desert winds or the poorly filtered flour. Every archaeologist working the site ends up with a mouthful of dust just by proximity, a fitting tribute to the grit their subjects once swallowed with every bite. They find grinding stones worn smooth from use, the indentations in the center still faintly holding the scent of crushed grain when moistened by the morning dew. Mortar bowls, sieves, paddle-shaped wooden mixing tools. It was a baker's world, if the baker happened to work under the looming shadow of a death monument. Then come the beer jars, hundreds, some broken, some intact, most ceramic and stained with time. The residue inside is unmistakable, a thick, yeasty sludge once used to brew low-alcohol beer. It wasn't for celebration. It was fuel, hydration, nutrition in liquid form. Fermentation made the water safer to drink, and the mash, rich with carbohydrates, helped sustain men pulling stones and pounding blocks under the hot Egyptian sun. Many of the jars bear simple marks, X's, lines, or faded glyphs that might denote batch, location, or the brewer's identity. Some are large, used for storage. Others are small and personal, the ancient equivalent of a water flask carried to the worksite and tipped back between heaves. You can imagine the noise, the crackle of firewood, the laughter of cooks trading gossip, the rhythm of dough being kneaded against stone boards. Smoke drifting up in curling pillars, while women stir pots and shout over children chasing chickens between the walls. There was rhythm to it all, a pulse that mirrored the rise of the pyramid above. While the men placed the king's tomb into history, the cooks and brewers down here kept them upright, one coarse loaf and sour gulp at a time. And among all this, bones, not human, at least not yet. These bones are animal: cow, goat, sheep, pig, and even fish. Some are scorched, others neatly cut, suggesting more than just scraps. The presence of meat stuns researchers. For centuries, historians believed the workers were fed little more than dried legumes and old bread. But here, hidden beneath centuries of disbelief, is evidence that someone cared enough or feared revolt enough to feed these laborers real food. Cow bones, in particular, are a revelation. Beef was expensive, even in the ancient world. Its presence here means that whoever supplied the camp saw these workers as worthy of more than survival. Whether it was generosity or necessity, an early form of state-sponsored nutrition to keep the labor force from collapsing, no one can say, but it changes everything. A cluster of animal bones arranged carefully beneath one wall appears to have been laid with intention. Some think it might have been a ritual deposit, a blessing on a newly built kitchen. Others believe it was simply the habit of a butcher who liked to keep his offcuts tidy. That's the magic of archaeology. Every answer leads to another question. Historians still wonder whether this careful arrangement reflects ceremony or simply sanitation. Even the garbage piles speak. Middens, as they're called, ancient trash heaps, turn out to be gold mines. Layered in them are the rhythms of life. Fish bones and broken jars, burnt barley and discarded baskets, fragments of sandals and chipped flint tools. Every handful of dirt contains 1,000 choices. What was eaten? What was broken? What was thrown away without a second thought, and now, centuries later, is held with tweezers and examined under magnifying glasses. But among the bones and jars and ovens, something else begins to emerge. A sense of scale. This wasn't a ragtag group of builders scraping together food between shifts. This was a state-supported labor force with logistics, with infrastructure, with supply lines extending back to Nile barges and Delta farms. Someone planned their meals. Someone organized their waste. Someone tracked the number of bread loaves and made sure the beer kept flowing. It becomes clear that Egypt didn't just build a pyramid. It built a society around its construction. Temporary cities sustained by ancient bureaucracy, designed to fuel the machine of monumentality. And here, in the quiet layers beneath the sand, you see the gears of that machine. One particularly well-preserved section of the site reveals a bakery with a built-in water trough and drainage basin. The trench beside it still shows sediment from runoff. That level of design doesn't happen by accident. These weren't just skilled workers. They were skilled supporters. The bakers, brewers, butchers, water carriers, tool sharpeners. Every hand played a role. Every blistered palm helped lift the pyramid, whether directly or not. And then, just when the excavation team believes they've uncovered the full extent of the village's daily rhythm, a new corner of the site is brushed clean to reveal a long, narrow chamber lined with nothing but storage jars. Rows and rows of them. Too many to count at first glance, some still sealed with ancient clay stoppers. When opened, they contain not only dried barley, but lentils, dates, and a paste of fish and grain. Not delicacies, but staples. Food meant to last, meant to fuel long shifts and longer nights. It is here, among the clay and the char, that the workers' lives become most vivid. Not through grand inscriptions or elaborate shrines, but through repetition, through routine, through the very ordinariness of it all. The fire pits lit at dawn, the baskets of bread delivered to the staging platforms, the jugs of beer sloshing on carts, the forgotten bones beneath the floorboards, where a dog might have hidden its prize. And in these quiet, dusty kitchens, history exhales. Because while the Pharaoh's name was carved in stone, the workers carved their legacy into clay jars and blackened ovens. While kings were embalmed with oils and gold, these people left behind the simplest traces: a smear of yeast, a singed pot, a groove worn into the ground by countless feet. It's not nothing. It's everything. If you want to understand the rhythm of life in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, you must start before the sun. Before the desert glows, before the foremen bark, before the sledges creak under stone, the village stirs with quiet ritual. The workers rise in staggered silence, some stretching sore limbs beneath scratchy linen blankets, others already crouched by the ovens, blowing softly on fading coals from the night before. The air smells of ash and barley, and something else, something more human, the sour tongue of old sweat and sun-warmed skin. A worker's day begins with dust beneath the nails and grit in the teeth. The first order of business is fuel, not for the body, though bread and beer will come, but for the tools. Clay is warmed and softened over a pit fire while the embers from last night's kill are stirred into life. A man kneels beside a low bench and begins forming new beer jars, shaping the rims with calloused thumbs. Nearby, someone patches a broken sledge runner with tar and rope. Across the way, a group of younger men sharpen bronze chisels against flat stones, their motions rhythmic, as if scraping away not just dullness, but the very fatigue of the previous day. The village isn't loud, but it moves with purpose. Voices murmur in half whispers, the kind of sound people make when conversation is just a way to pass time. You can hear someone humming an old song, something about crocodiles and lazy gods. A baby cries, then stops. Roosters crow, or perhaps argue with one another. The heat has not yet risen, but it waits at the edge of the sky, and everyone feels it. There's a kind of weariness in the movement, but not defeat. These people know the day will be long. They always are. By mid-morning, the camp has divided into its daily flows. The stronger men make their way to the pyramid itself, forming teams for lifting, hauling, and block placement. Others are assigned to quarry duty, loaded into carts, and dragged toward the distant limestone pits. But many remain here in the village, not idle, not forgotten, but just as vital. They are the ones who shape, cook, clean, and carry. The invisible engine behind the monument. Take the potter's yard, for example. It hums with activity from dawn to dusk. A boy no older than 12 kneads clay with his feet, churning the wet gray earth in a wide pit, his knees caked in mud. Beside him, his older brother molds the softened paste into cooking pots, turning them on a wheel made from an old chariot hub. The pots aren't delicate. They're made to survive fire and rough handling, not to impress nobles. A woman stacks finished vessels along a shaded wall, tapping them gently to check for cracks. A few feet away, her mother stirs a pot of boiling water thick with barley, flavoring it with a dried onion and whatever herbs were still fresh this morning. Then there's the charcoal maker. He's not a popular man, but he's necessary. His pit is dug at the edge of the village, far enough that the smoke doesn't taint the bread ovens, but close enough for daily delivery. He burns acacia wood in great heaps, controlling the fire with layers of sand and dung to limit oxygen and draw out the process. The result is dense black fuel that burns hot and long, perfect for smelting tools or firing the heavier kilns. His arms are stained with soot, his eyes always slightly red. No one talks to him much. He smells like burnt time. A bit farther on, at the water trench, 2 men wrestle with a large skin filled from a nearby canal. They pour its contents into a holding jar, pausing to sip from cupped hands. The water is warm, murky, and just clean enough. One of them spits and mutters that it tastes like yesterday's donkey bath. The other laughs. They both drink anyway. Hydration is survival, and survival isn't picky. Children run between all of this, barefoot and mostly ignored, darting through alleyways and kicking smooth stones between mud brick walls. A few are tasked with gathering kindling or fetching broken tools. Others are just waiting to be old enough to join the work crews, to hold a chisel without dropping it, to haul rope without tripping. They learn by watching, by listening, by absorbing the rhythm of their parents' lives, one charcoal streaked sunrise at a time. Lunchtime comes without bells or signals. It arrives with the smell of baking bread, and the clatter of pottery. Workers trickle back from the pyramid site, their tunics damp with sweat, their backs arched like question marks. They sit on overturned baskets, shaded only by canvas tarps stretched over wooden poles. Bread is passed around, hard, dense, dry. Beer follows, warm and slightly sour. Someone throws a bone to a dog lurking nearby. A woman sings while kneading dough, her voice rising above the heat like a reed flute. It's not joy, exactly, but it is human. The meal is quick. No one eats slowly. Time isn't generous, and the sun climbs faster than hunger fades. After a few minutes, the camp empties again. Back to the ramps, the quarry, the fire pits, the survey lines. But the village continues to move in its own loop, mending tools, reshaping pots, turning raw grain into something close to sustenance. Every task is part of a greater breath. Inhale, exhale. Clay, charcoal. Lift, fire, repair. As afternoon bleeds into evening, the light shifts. The heat dims, but the air grows heavier. Workers return in larger waves now, limping, silent, coated in dust and fatigue. The fires are rekindled. The smell of roasting onions and flatbread drifts through the alleys. Someone plays a flute again, low, slow notes that fall like soft stones in water. Conversations are brief and often broken by yawns. No one stays up long. There's no energy left to waste on stargazing or stories. Tomorrow waits just over the horizon, wearing the same face. By nightfall, the fire pits have settled to low glows. A few embers remain active in the potter's kiln. The bread ovens cool beneath layers of ash. The village sleeps in clusters, some on rooftops to catch the breeze, others huddled on mats inside clay rooms, their backs curved toward one another like parentheses. No one dreams of glory. Glory belongs to the dead. What they dream of is cooler mornings, shorter ramps, softer bread, or perhaps nothing at all. And yet, in this rhythm, this endless day of clay and charcoal, something remarkable happens. The pyramid grows, stone by stone, breath by breath, not through miracles, but through repetition, through patience, through labor that never sees the top, but holds the base steady. Here, beneath the monument, the real story is written. The bones tell a quieter story than the blocks. Beneath the shadow of the pyramid, in the sandy layers of the workers' village, archaeologists uncover skeletons that have more to say than any royal inscription. At first glance, they seem ordinary, scattered fragments in middens, partial burials tucked beside a wall, the occasional full skeleton collapsed in a shallow grave. But when the remains are examined closely, with patient hands and careful brushes, the truth begins to whisper through each crack and scar. These were not just laborers. They were survivors. A man's femur, thick with an uneven bulge, reveals a healed fracture. Not an unattended injury. This one was set. It mended well enough that the man likely walked again, perhaps with a limp, perhaps without. Elsewhere, a wrist bone fused at an awkward angle shows signs of both trauma and adaptation. Someone tended to him. Someone wrapped that wrist, perhaps braced it with splints made of reed or scrap wood. In another burial, a shoulder blade is marked by repetitive strain, deep grooves, and worn-down muscle attachment points from years of pulling heavy ropes. That man didn't just get injured once. His whole body was shaped by the work. And yet, he didn't die from it. Not immediately. That's what stands out. Because the prevailing myth has long been that pyramid labor was brutal, unrelenting, and utterly dehumanizing. That workers dropped where they stood and were discarded like broken tools. But the bones suggest something more complicated. These people lived through their injuries. They weren't patched up with luxury, but they were patched up. They weren't buried with honor, but they weren't ignored. There was, it seems, a structure of care beneath the weight of the stone. Nearby, in a smaller chamber once used as storage, Archaeologists find a set of war weave baskets filled with medical tools, bronze scalpels dulled from use, small ceramic jars containing traces of honey, resin, and old plant paste. A smooth stone slab, its surface lightly grooved, perhaps used for grinding herbs. And then, tucked into the corner, a tightly bound roll of linen strips stained with something reddish-brown, blood, or medicine. It's hard to say, but these are not ceremonial items. They are not offerings or priestly props. These tools were used. The texts don't survive here, not in full. No scrolls detailing medical procedures or gods of healing, but the context fills the gaps. Someone knew how to clean a wound. Someone understood the importance of immobilizing a broken bone. Someone brewed concoctions that dulled pain or soothed infection, or at the very least offered comfort. It wasn't magic, it was care. Maybe minimal, maybe makeshift, but real. There are hints elsewhere too. In one corner of the village, a cluster of narrow rooms appears to have housed the sick or injured. The beds are low platforms of packed earth, not unlike those found in common homes, but they are spaced wider. A few have shallow trenches running along the base, likely for waste removal. Near one of these, a small fire pit sits unusually close, perhaps for heating poultices or boiling water. This was no temple, no grand hospital, just a space, quiet, shadowed, enough. Among the skeletons in this area, one stands out, a woman in her 30s, buried with her legs curled beneath her and one arm laid gently across her chest. Her spine is bent in an unnatural curve, likely from a long-term illness or injury. Her ribs show signs of chronic inflammation, but her teeth are clean. Her bones, though misshapen, are well preserved. She lived with her condition for years. That means someone fed her, cleaned her, sat beside her during the worst days, not because she was royal, but because she was there. In another grave, closer to the workers' barracks, lies a young man, perhaps 20, with a badly healed ankle. It would have made climbing ramps or hauling sledges nearly impossible. But his burial shows care. His body was laid straight, hands resting on his chest, a small jar placed near his feet. It's nothing fancy, but it's something. Enough to say he mattered. Historians still debate what this all means. Was it organized state care? A rudimentary form of early workers' compensation? Or was it simply the natural result of living in a community? When hundreds of people rely on each other to survive, perhaps even the ancient state saw the benefit in keeping them functional. Perhaps it was less about compassion and more about continuity. But even if the system was cold, the gestures weren't. Bandaging a wound, sharing a loaf, carrying someone back to camp. That doesn't come from royal edict. That comes from people. You can imagine the scenes. A man sprains his shoulder while lifting a block. He yells, drops the rope, sinks to his knees. Others pause, not long, just enough to see if he can stand. When he doesn't, someone signals the overseer. The injured man is taken back to camp, wrapped in a spare tunic, laid on a mat in the shade. Later, someone brings him a jar of beer. A woman from the kitchens applies a bitter-smelling paste to his shoulder. She ties it with strips of old linen. He winces. She shrugs. You want the bread, don't you? He nods, and so the work continues. The pain never leaves, not entirely. He feels it with each morning stretch. But he's back at the site the next week. Slower, yes, but still moving. Still part of the whole. That's what these fragments reveal. A society stitched together not just by labor, but by endurance, by repetition, by an understanding that if one falls, the others must carry more. And if too many fall, the pyramid doesn't rise. Even in death, that understanding remains. The graves are simple, shallow, marked by nothing more than packed earth and the occasional pottery shard. But they are not scattered. They are clustered, as if even in the afterlife, The workers preferred to rest side by side, not lost beneath the grandeur of the king, but remembered in proximity. A community, even in stillness. The archaeologists brush around each bone with reverence. They photograph, they catalog. But sometimes they just pause. They stare at the curve of a spine, the angle of a jaw, the small dip worn into a kneecap by years of strain. They imagine the cough, the limp, the jokes shared at dusk. The way someone must have leaned on a friend after a long day. The way someone else must have offered water. A seat, a moment, because even here, even in a world defined by stone and sun, there was a softness at the edge of things. A shared breath, a mumbled curse, a hand on a shoulder, a hint of care. When we picture the workers of the Great Pyramid, we often imagine a faceless mass, sunburnt bodies straining in unison, anonymous figures bent beneath massive blocks. But the truth, as it usually is far more nuanced. These weren't machines. These weren't servants in chains, or nameless laborers crushed beneath the will of a god-king. These were people, complex, varied, often overlooked, each with a name, a story, and a reason for being there. The village beneath the pyramid wasn't a prison camp. It was a working-class neighborhood. The evidence suggests something astonishing. Many of the men who labored on the pyramid were not forced to be there. They were skilled artisans, seasonal workers, even farmers rotating in during the agricultural off-season. Some came from surrounding villages, others from more distant provinces, drawn in by royal summons, kinship ties, or the promise of steady food during a bad flood year. They came by foot, by donkey, by boat up the Nile, and they didn't all look the same. They weren't all cut from one cloth. One team might be made up of bricklayers from a delta town, known for their tall foreheads and worn hands. Another group might be stone polishers from the south, men who spoke in a slightly different dialect and carried their own local customs. Then there were the overseers, some strict and bitter, others half-drunk and singing. And scattered among them were those who didn't quite fit anywhere. A boy too young, perhaps apprenticing. An elder who'd once helped raise the first causeway, now staying behind to cook, too stiff in the knees to haul. And occasionally, women, mostly in the kitchens, yes, but perhaps also at the ramps, passing tools, checking water jars, or calling children inside at dusk. Among the village's ruins, the names begin to surface. Carved roughly into pot shards or scratched onto bricks, they don't speak of glory. They're ordinary, Nakt, Seneb, Ka, common names, but personal ones. One fragment bears a nickname, the Panther, beside a cartoonish doodle of a man with a cat's tail and oversized ears. Was it a joke? A team name? A proud signature from someone who wanted to be remembered, even if only by accident? Historians still wonder who these men truly were in the eyes of their own society. Were they honored for their service? Paid, perhaps? Treated as tools? The evidence hints at a blend. Workers appear to have been organized into units, sometimes referred to in surviving records as gangs. These gangs had names, some intimidating, others humorous. One famous unit discovered in tomb graffiti called themselves the Drunkards of Menkaure, which, let's be honest, sounds like the kind of group that makes more noise than progress after lunch. Within these gangs were smaller divisions, often centered around a leader. This was a man of middle rank, not a noble, not quite a laborer, who acted as both foreman and father figure. He was responsible for discipline, performance, morale. Sometimes his name appears in a bit of graffiti, always scratched a little larger than the rest. Men joked about their bosses, just like they do today. Some drawings show whip-wielding overseers with exaggerated stomachs or buck teeth. Satire in the shadow of eternity. There's no denying that life was hard. But the way these workers were organized suggests a culture of camaraderie rather than pure coercion. They weren't just units in a workforce. They were teams with rivalries, reputations, pride. Evidence shows they competed with one another for speed, for precision, maybe even for royal recognition. A particularly fine block placement might earn extra rations. A broken rope might cost your gang its lunch. And yet, beneath the structure, there was still the individual. You imagine a man named Wee, born in a village near Thebes, a stonecutter's son. He grows up shaping river pebbles into sling stones. By 12, he's hauling firewood for his father. At 15, he's conscripted into a building crew. He makes the long journey north, joins a pyramid team, and finds himself living in a mud brick barrack beside a man from Memphis who snores like a crocodile. He isn't remarkable, but he learns to chisel limestone with efficiency. He makes friends. He eats boiled lentils. One day, he falls in love with a woman who bakes barley cakes beside the bread ovens. Maybe he sneaks her an extra meat bone. Maybe she laughs. He dies before the pyramid is done. A dropped stone, a fever, a bad cut that doesn't heal. His body is wrapped in woven cloth and buried near the village wall. No monument, no inscription. But a coworker, another nameless man, scratches High's name onto a jar and places it beside the grave. That jar survives. It tells us someone remembered. That's who these men were. They were remembered. And yet, we're left with gaps. So many gaps. Their stories don't unfold neatly. Most left no more than a broken pot, a worn sandal, a faded fingerprint pressed into clay. Their lives don't survive in grand prose or sweeping epics. They survive in habits. In the way a wall was reinforced. In the depth of a hearth. In the scraps they buried without knowing the future would dig them up again. Some had ambitions. Perhaps one wanted to move to the city, earn enough to buy a small boat, open a reed market stall. Another might have dreamed of becoming a foreman, of being the one to shout orders and measure bricks. A few were probably indifferent, just trying to stay fed, to avoid injury, to make it through another shift without losing a toe. What unites them isn't just the pyramid. It's the unacknowledged bravery of daily repetition. Waking up with soreness in your back and knowing it'll be worse tomorrow. Eating the same bread, hauling the same rope, ducking the same overseer's glare, and still laughing at dinner. Still teasing your gangmates. Still watching the sun rise behind the limestone slope and thinking, it's almost done, just a little higher. They weren't immortalized in stone, but they carried it. They weren't born to be remembered, but they are. Not as Pharaoh's army, not as servants, but as people, workers, builders, friends, and maybe that's enough. The Great Pyramid stands as a monument to ambition, to ritual, to the divine ego of a single man wrapped in gold and eternity. But beneath all that stone, literally beneath it, lie the forgotten voices. Not just in metaphor, but in matter. Tiny fingerprints pressed into drying bricks. Half-faded names scratched into quarry walls. Left-handed chisel marks. A cluster of worn sandals buried under a worker's ramp. These are the echoes of people who never made it into the official histories. Because the real foundation of this monument was never just limestone or granite. It was human. It was knees grinding into sand, shoulders bent against wooden sledges, breath drawn short under the weight of stone. Each groove in the ramp, each scuffed step in the dusty village lanes is a sentence in a story written without ink. It's not found in libraries or carved on the palace walls. It's scattered in pieces, murmuring from broken bones, from abandoned tools, from a thumbprint in the base of a pot no one ever meant to keep. In the worker barracks, down in the layers where midden heaps slowly collapse over time, archaeologists have uncovered traces of something more personal than Pharaoh's lofty plans. There are work rosters etched into pottery fragments, names of gang members, scratched in with reed pens or charcoal. The Friends of Khufu, one team calls themselves. Another goes by the Vigorous Gang, a name that might have meant efficiency or might have been a joke. Then there's one fragment, just a few inches across, bearing the words, "Mirror was here." That might not mean much unless you know the name. Mirror was an overseer, and his journal, found hundreds of kilometers from Giza, contains the first-hand logistical record of pyramid construction. A daily log of moving stones by boat down the Nile, of deliveries, delays, and decisions. He wasn't a king, not a scribe in the palace, just a man with a task, noting how wind, water, and manpower aligned to shift the dreams of his superiors into reality. That single line scratched in limestone, whether written by Mirror himself or by a worker who admired or hated him, is a thread connecting us across 4,000 years. He was there. He worked. He mattered. But most of those who toiled in the pyramid's shadow left no names, no journals, only were patterns and tiny mysteries. A notch on a chisel blade that doesn't match any known workshop. A sandstone figurine of a hippo buried beneath a doorway. A child's handprint in drying clay, too small to be an accident. Perhaps a daughter following her father to the potter's yard, pressing her fingers into the corner of a drying brick and giggling. The brick was used. Her print still rests, preserved beneath the structure. And in the bones, even more stories. Not of glory, but of continuity. A man whose healed femur suggests care after injury. A woman with spinal deformities who lived long enough to show signs of advanced arthritis. Someone helped her survive. Someone carried her food. Someone shared water, spread a mat for her to sleep, sat with her while she coughed through dust-heavy nights. These details don't change the grand historical narrative, but they illuminate the edges. They remind us that history wasn't just happening to the powerful. It was being built by the forgotten. The garbage pits, those humble heaps of charcoal scraps, fish bones, broken jars, are perhaps the richest source of memory. They don't tell a story in the language of kings, but in the rhythms of daily life. What people ate, what they repaired, what they discarded, the bread loaves with bite marks, the beer jars that cracked in fire and were patched with mud instead of replaced, the sandals with double-thick soles, worn through anyway. Everything built was built to wear out. Even the tools of the builders broke beneath the weight of what they were building. And tucked among the discarded, an amulet shaped like a lotus, no more than a thumb's length, carved from a bit of soft stone, worn smooth by fingers. Someone must have carried it for years. Perhaps it was a token from home, a keepsake from a mother or wife. And then one day, it was lost, or buried, or deliberately left behind. No inscription, no gold. Just one person's quiet need for comfort in the shadow of a project that had nothing to do with them. Historians still argue, were these men volunteers or conscripts? Were they paid or fed and housed as a form of tax? Were they proud or simply surviving? But the artifacts resist simple answers. The presence of small luxuries, a fishhook, a polished comb, a decorative bowl, suggests more than drudgery. It suggests life, not always good, not always fair, but active, real. Even in death, the echoes remain. The graves beside the village are shallow, often unmarked, but they cluster together. Some contain bits of pottery or bread. One man was buried with a broken mallet laid beside his hip, perhaps a symbol of his trade, or perhaps just the only thing he truly owned. Another grave held a woman with a string of faience beads still resting near her neck. She wasn't a queen, she wasn't a priestess, but she wore beauty. Someone saw her as worthy of it. There's a kind of defiance in these details, a refusal to vanish completely. When we visit ruins, we often imagine only the kings and scribes. But beneath the official story lies a world built on weary hands and repeated effort. No hymns were sung to these builders, no statues made in their image. But without them, there would be no monuments left to wonder about. The pyramid doesn't record their names. But it couldn't exist without their bodies. Even the mistakes carry memory. A block slightly misaligned, corrected by shaving down its edge. A cart rut worn too deep, forcing the construction of a side path. These aren't failures. They're footprints. They prove that real people were here. Not gods, not immortals, but humans navigating the impossible one tug, one breath, one adjustment at a time. Imagine standing there as the pyramid nears completion. You're just a stonecutter. You won't see the burial. You won't be invited to the dedication ceremony. But you know that your sweat is inside the ramp, your fingerprints inside a block, your story pressed invisibly into the history that future kings will claim as their own. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Because what endures is not just the shape of the pyramid, but the presence of those who carried it into being. The path carved into the desert. The laughter that once echoed between mud brick homes. The smell of yeast and charcoal in the morning air. All the quiet human things. So next time you picture the pyramid, don't just see its golden capstone. See the calloused hands, the cracked pots, the finger-smooth edges of a worn bowl. See the people who lived in its shadow and made the impossible possible. Because if we listen closely enough, they're all still here, still whispering from the foundations, still waiting to be seen. And now, as the sun sets behind the stones and the workers' village falls silent for the night, we leave this world of dust and calloused labor. Our path leads up into polished halls and perfumed rooms, where power moves not with ropes and sledges, but with glances, feasts, and soft-spoken commands. The work there is cleaner, but no less dangerous. Let's step into the palace now, where the Pharaoh's court holds secrets of its own. You barely notice the transition. One moment, your feet are on hard-packed dust beneath the blazing sun, and the next, you're standing in filtered light, sandal soles muffled by woven rush mats. The clamor of hammers and ropes has faded. In its place, a silence that hums with tension. You're in the palace now, not just a building, but a universe apart. The limestone walls rise cool and smooth around you, not roughly cut like those of the pyramid, but polished to a pale shimmer, decorated with careful inlays, hieroglyphs winding in graceful arcs. The air smells different here, less like sweat and stone, more like sweet resin, old papyrus, and the faint metallic edge of something sacred. It's not as grand as you might imagine. Not endless marble, not golden fountains. No, this is Egypt's reality, not Hollywood's fantasy. The palace is a cluster of rooms around shaded courtyards, designed less for spectacle and more for flow. Corridors funnel breeze in from carefully placed vents, and the roof is latticed to allow slivers of light, but none of the heat. The silence isn't peaceful. It's deliberate. Every person who walks these halls has learned to tread lightly, to speak carefully, and to keep their eyes slightly lowered. You follow suit. There's movement just ahead. Two scribes glide past in long linen kilts, each carrying a wooden writing case slung under one arm. They nod at you without speaking. You nod back, neither smiles. This isn't the village. There's no room for jokes here. Everything in the court is about posture, about subtlety. Even standing too straight can seem like arrogance if done in front of the wrong person. Even speaking too softly can imply secrets. And there are always secrets. A palace like this breathes them. Whispers slip through the reed screens. Eyes peer between woven drapes. You quickly realize that nothing here is ever said aloud if it can be communicated with a glance. The women who serve in the perfume rooms know this best. They don't just apply oils, they curate moods. A dab of myrrh before a royal banquet can soften tension. A heavier incense blend in the Pharaoh's chamber can lull a rival into calm. There's an entire world here, governed not by official law, but by ritual and timing, by the invisible tug of power moving behind the scenes. You pass into one of the outer preparation rooms, where attendants and lower scribes perform their daily rituals. There's a low table covered in sealed clay jars. Some are labeled with mixtures for the Pharaoh's skin, balms of crushed cedar and almond oil. Others hold pigments for eye paint, malachite green and coal black. One scribe is mixing a paste with practiced rhythm, grinding herbs in a stone bowl while humming softly under his breath. You don't know the song, but it doesn't matter. It's not meant for you. It's meant to fill the space, to drown out the sound of things not meant to be heard. In one corner, a eunuch carefully folds a fresh linen robe, brushing imaginary dust from its surface. He places it beside a gold-handled mirror. The mirror catches a sliver of light and bounces it against the far wall, an accidental beacon in a room trained to avoid attention. You watch it flicker and vanish as the robe covers it. No one remarks on it. That's how things work here. You don't comment on mistakes. You adjust quietly, gracefully, always pretending that nothing went wrong. Because in a world like this, perception is everything. You move deeper, toward the heart of the residence. Past the pillars carved to resemble papyrus stalks, through a shaded colonnade where the air feels cooler, almost damp. You can't help but notice how your own breath seems louder here. Every step feels exaggerated. You glance behind you, half expecting to see someone watching. No one is. And yet, you know they are. This is the real pyramid, the invisible one. Built not of stone, but of eyes and influence, of alliances and unspoken debts. The hierarchy is just as strict here, but its architecture is softer, its scaffolding hidden. The high priests and royal advisors don't wear whips or bark orders. They speak gently, fold their hands, tilt their heads. But make no mistake, they are just as dangerous. You enter a receiving room, smaller than you'd expect, lined with lotus-patterned cushions and low tables. A scent of frankincense hangs in the air like a veil. On the far wall, a painting shows the Pharaoh seated with a falcon on his shoulder. His eyes are stylized, distant, divine. It's less a portrait than a message. He sees everything. He needs nothing. You glance at the image, then look away, as everyone here has learned to do. In one corner, a group of women reclines on mats, murmuring in soft tones. Not wives, not concubines, something more ambiguous. Royal companions, perhaps. Or spies. It depends on who's asking. One holds a small golden fan. Another is threading a string of blue glazed beads. Their laughter is light, almost musical, but you feel the chill in it. It's not joy. It's precision. Historians still wonder what role these women played behind closed doors. Were they merely decoration? Or did they influence decisions whispered between kisses and oil-slicked shoulders? Some records suggest letters passed through them. That poison may have, once or twice, slipped into a cup by the same hands that poured wine. There are gaps in the official record, always. But court gossip survives longer than granite. And this court, like all others, was soaked in it. You start to notice patterns. How certain corridors are busier than others, despite being longer. How some servants walk in pairs, while others move alone but fast. There's a rhythm to it all, a choreography of caution. Even the birds perched in the window screens seem quieter here, as if aware they're sharing space with secrets. And then, through an archway, you glimpse the back of the Pharaoh's chair. He's not in it, but its presence fills the room. Carved from ebony, inlaid with ivory and gold, the chair is not just a seat. It's a symbol. Everything here bends toward it. Conversations stop a little sooner near its legs. Steps become more measured. The man who will eventually sit there is still in his chambers, perhaps speaking with the high priest, perhaps in silent communion with his gods. It doesn't matter. The throne makes the rules, even when it's empty. Someone passes you a cup of wine. It's sweet, spiced with cinnamon and pomegranate. You sip without thinking. It's a reminder. In this world, even refreshments carry weight. A gift could be a gesture of inclusion or a test, and no one ever tells you which until it's too late. You rest the cup carefully on a carved stool and feel the eyes of a servant watching you from across the room. Not judgmental, just attentive, as if waiting to see what kind of person you are, as if writing your place into the unspoken hierarchies that live in the walls. This is life at court. Not the glamour, but the glide, the hush, the way every choice might be a performance and every silence might be a shield. And as the sun fades outside and oil lamps cast long shadows across the painted walls, you begin to realize that power here doesn't shout. It breathes softly, wears perfume, and watches. In the Pharaoh's court, power doesn't always wear a crown. More often, it moves quietly in soft sandals, arms full of scrolls or perfume jars, eyes lowered but ears wide open. While the throne sits at the center of everything, it's the people around it, the servants, the scribes, the stewards who keep the royal machinery running. They are the human gears that allow the illusion of effortless grandeur to shimmer without stutter. You step into a side corridor, narrower than the processional halls, but still lined with painted plaster and carved wooden beams. Here, the court breathes in a different rhythm. The scent of cedar ink and worn parchment lingers in the air. Small oil lamps glow along the walls, their light catching the gold flecks in the painted hieroglyphs. You notice the faint shuffle of feet, the occasional cough stifled behind a curtain, and the rustle of linen as scribes pass each other in near silence. This is the quieter kingdom, the administrative underbelly of Egyptian power, and it's just as crucial as any temple or throne room. A scribe passes by you, young, hunched, moving fast, but careful not to let the wooden writing case under his arm bounce. His left hand is stained with ink, and he has the look of someone halfway between nervous and exhausted. He doesn't make eye contact, but you catch a glimpse of determination beneath his lowered brow. His name, if you were to ask, might be something like Mena or Dedu. You won't find him on a monument, but his handwriting fills more scrolls than any noble ever touched. He vanishes into a records chamber, a small room lined floor to ceiling with rolled papyri bundled into slots. You follow, stepping into a space thick with dust and quiet ambition. Here, records are everything. Shipments from Nubia, granary reports from the Delta, temple donations in Memphis, royal decrees, marriage alliances, dowries, birth logs, astronomical charts, grain tallies, and the occasional suspiciously vague entry about missing goats. It's all here. Every delicate piece of bureaucracy that supports a divine ruler and his realm. You watch as two scribes work at low benches, their reed pens darting across papyrus like dragonflies skimming the Nile. They barely speak. One adjusts a chart listing the phases of the moon, marking the days considered most favorable for court announcements. The other adds another line to a list of tribute offerings. 1 alabaster jar, 4 measures of incense, 6 baskets of pomegranates, 2 bolts of dyed linen. Each word matters. Each figure must be correct. Mistakes, in this place, are not just inconvenient, they are political liabilities. Historians still debate how much influence the scribes wielded. Officially, they were servants of the state, tools of record-keeping. But it's hard to ignore the power of those who control the ink. A minor clerk with the right access could know who was favored and who had fallen out of grace before anyone else. A particularly ambitious scribe could steer an entire estate's fate by how he phrased a tax notice. And more than one royal marriage proposal has been buried forever in an archivist's misplaced file. In a world where everything depends on protocol, the pen is more than a tool. It's a weapon. Outside the records room, you move through another hallway and into the servant quarters, quieter, humbler, but no less essential. The kitchen steward, a man with arms like tree branches and a scar across one eyebrow, is overseeing the preparation of the evening meal. You smell garlic, coriander, roast fish, and dates stewing in honey. The cooks work like dancers, slipping past each other in a rhythm honed by years of routine. The floor is damp from spilled water, and the clay ovens radiate a heat that curls your toes even from across the room. One woman is plucking a duck with practiced ease. Another stirs a massive pot of lentils with a wooden paddle as tall as she is. Every movement is purposeful. Every task is part of a choreography that few outside the court ever witness. The palace may feast on platters of jeweled food, but it's these hands that roast and stir and knead behind the curtain. They taste the pharaoh's meals long before he does, and not just for poison, though yes, that too, sometimes. In another chamber, linens are being pressed and folded. You pause to watch a servant smoothing creases from a robe, so finely woven it shimmers like the surface of the Nile at dawn. She doesn't look up, none of them do, but you can feel it in the air, that strange combination of pride and invisibility. They're the background of every court ritual, every banquet, every blessing, every procession. They hold the fans, light the incense, adjust the wigs, fetch the scrolls. And while they may never speak in the throne room, they know everything that happens in it. There's a boy in the corner, too young for full duties, but old enough to run errands. He watches everything. You can see it in his eyes, the way he clocks who walks where, who nods to whom, who carries what kind of jar. In 10 years, he'll be a steward. In 20, maybe the head of a noble's household. The palace raises its own, and everyone starts somewhere near the floor. And it's not all fear and obedience either. You notice it in a quick joke exchanged between two stewards, in the shared bite of honeyed dates when no one important is looking, in the pause of a linen folder who stops just for a second to admire her reflection in a polished silver plate. Life persists. Even in the machine of a kingdom, humanity sneaks in. Even their footwear speaks. The sandals here are soft, often made of finely braided papyrus or leather, so worn it barely holds shape. Some are adorned with tiny beads or dyed with saffron. You spot a pair left outside a chamber, small, delicate, curved with use. They say more than the room behind the door ever could. Someone important walks softly here, and someone else kneels to place those sandals just so, every morning. They all walk the edge of power, close enough to feel its warmth, far enough to be burned if they misstep. But in their quiet, careful ways, they keep the court alive. They know who's whispering behind which curtain. They know when the high priest leaves early and when the pharaoh dines alone. They pass messages in silences, build alliances over wash basins, and carry memory in fingers that never stop moving. This is the other side of royalty, the heartbeat hidden behind a gold mask. And as the palace settles into evening, its corridors cooled by thick stone and slow shadows, you begin to understand that power here doesn't just descend from a throne. It flows through every soft sandal, every rolled scroll, every whispered name behind closed doors. You might think pleasing a god would be simple. Offer some incense, bow the right number of times, and call it a day. But when that god is also a man, specifically Pharaoh Khufu, divine on earth, ruler of the Nile, and owner of your salary, the politics get complicated. This isn't just religion. It's performance. It's diplomacy. It's walking a balance beam of etiquette, devotion, and timing, with a golden cobra always watching from the nearest column. The court doesn't treat the pharaoh as just a king. He is the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, and also the son of Ra, the sun god, and probably the rightful owner of your future, your past, and possibly your goat. Every breath he takes affirms cosmic balance. Every nod from his shaved head carries theological weight, and every sneeze could be interpreted 3 different ways by 3 different priests. When the pharaoh clears his throat, the palace holds its breath. If he laughs, you smile. If he frowns, someone somewhere loses their job, their land, or their kneecaps. In a world like this, politics becomes theater. You watch from the edge of a columned hall as courtiers file in for the morning ritual, an audience not so much with a man as with a sunbeam in human form. They move like reeds in the wind, soft, graceful, constantly bending toward the same center. One noble adjusts his collar 3 times in a single minute. Another breathes into his hands to check his breath, and mouths a quick prayer to Thoth for eloquence. No one wants to be the one who speaks too soon, too much, or not enough. The Pharaoh enters, flanked by attendants and cloaked in fine linen that almost glows in the light. His eyes sweep the room like slow knives. Behind him, the high priest of Ra chants something low and rhythmic, reminding everyone of the divine order, the Mat, that holds the world together. You could almost feel the collective stomach of the court tighten. Every phrase must be perfect, every syllable loaded with reverence. They're not just speaking to a man, they're reinforcing reality. And it's exhausting, because even silence is political here. A single blink, a step too close, a compliment phrased with just a hint of ambiguity. It all matters. Did your eyes linger too long on the princess when she poured wine? Was that comment about the Nile's bounty interpreted as a veiled critique of last year's harvest? Is that priest quietly laughing at something you missed? You'll spend hours dissecting moments, replaying them in your head, wondering what ripple you caused and who's going to ride it. You glance toward the scribes positioned along the wall, each with a reed pen poised to record anything deemed significant. These aren't simple transcripts. These are curated realities, shaped narratives. If the Pharaoh decides a conversation should be remembered, it is. If he chooses to forget, it vanishes, like a dream at dawn. And if you're in the memory that vanishes, so might your influence. Historians still puzzle over just how much power the Pharaoh truly held, and how much was orchestrated through fear and pageantry. Did Khufu rule with an iron fist or a velvet glove? Did his court manipulate him behind incense screens? Or did he control every variable, like a chess player 5 moves ahead? The records disagree, as they always do. But the architecture of power remains, etched in every behavior you see. Like in the temple complex, where a group of priests prepares offerings on polished stone tables. You watch them arrange bread, figs, onions, and a small roast fowl with the precision of engineers. Every item symbolizes something. Every item must be fresh, symmetrical, and appropriately divine. The food won't be eaten. It will be presented, praised, and then quietly whisked away. The Pharaoh might glance at it once, or not at all, but everyone will remember how it was placed, including you. Later, during a ceremonial hunt in the palace gardens, the Pharaoh is meant to shoot a goose released from a golden cage. The event is symbolic: power over nature, order over chaos. You see the tension in the handlers' faces when the goose bolts in the wrong direction. One servant stumbles, another gasps, but the Pharaoh calmly adjusts his bow and strikes. The crowd applauds. A minor moment, a major success. The myth remains intact, but these performances don't always go smoothly. One courtier, emboldened by a small wine jar too many, makes a clumsy joke during a banquet. The room goes still. The Pharaoh stares at him, unreadable. The man tries to recover, bows too quickly, and knocks over a small bowl of dates. You don't see him the next day. No one mentions his name. His seat at the evening meal remains conspicuously empty, the cushion undisturbed, the place setting quietly removed. The lesson is clear. The court loves laughter, but only the right kind, in the right amount, at the right time. So much of your day becomes devoted to anticipating mood, watching the light shift in the Pharaoh's expression. A raised brow might mean curiosity or disdain. A smile might mean favor or a warning. You learn to read the tone of a sigh, the tilt of a head, the speed of a footstep. It's less about truth and more about tempo. Even clothing plays a role. Linen thickness denotes rank. Jewelry placement can signal alliances. A missing earring might suggest grief or protest. That gold fly-shaped amulet someone wears? It means bravery in battle. Or maybe a gift from the queen. Or maybe just fashion. You never really know. And that's the point. Everyone here speaks a dozen languages without opening their mouths. The language of perfume, the language of posture, of fabric, of silence. The politics of pleasing a god aren't about belief. They're about performance. About making sure you're always in the right story, even if it means pretending to forget your own. And as you sit in the edge of a shaded colonnade, watching the sun inch lower across the sky, you understand the irony. The divine Pharaoh may control the stars, the flood, the heavens. But he is also trapped, locked in his own performance. He cannot yawn without someone interpreting it, cannot frown without causing fear. His life is a mirror, shining, polished, and always reflecting others. And as the sun sets and the priests begin preparing the evening hymns, you realize just how exhausting it is to live in a place where every breath might echo for eternity. In the shimmering world of Pharaoh's court, where incense wafts through lattice screens and power moves as softly as linen against skin, the women command their own kingdom, one woven from glances, whispers, and presence alone. But don't let the elegance fool you. Behind every kohl-lined gaze and polished carnelian bead lies a life bound as tightly as the jeweled collars around their necks. Being a woman of the court is no fairy tale. It's a performance, a calculation, and often a quiet struggle played out beneath layers of silk and status. You enter their world through a garden courtyard walled with white plaster and shaded by sycamore fig trees. Birds chirp faintly in the branches. A servant is arranging lotus flowers in a stone basin, plucking the bruised petals and discarding them one by one. Near a carved bench, two women sit cross-legged, murmuring softly, while a third brushes a length of black hair so long it grazes the mat. It's a quiet moment, full of grace. But grace, in this place, is never an accident. It's a craft. Each of these women wears perfume, subtle blends of frankincense, and lotus oil pressed into small cones and placed atop their wigs, melting slowly through the day. Their dresses are made of pleated linen, so fine it's nearly translucent in the sun, stitched to move just so with each motion. And the cosmetics? Not just decoration. The malachite and kohl are protection against both glare and envy. Beauty here is armor, ritual, and diplomacy. Some of these women are daughters of nobles, sent to serve in the royal household as a symbol of loyalty. Others are wives or concubines of the pharaoh himself. Their presence in the court as political as any treaty. A few, perhaps, rose from more modest beginnings, favorites of a queen, daughters of influential priests, women with sharp minds and perfect posture. The hierarchy among them is silent, but strict. Who sits where? Who receives the best oils? Who is permitted to hand the pharaoh his cup of wine? All of it matters. And while the male court navigates the politics of scrolls and titles, these women operate in a realm just as complex, the politics of presence. A well-timed compliment can sway favor. A raised eyebrow can unseat a rival. A slight change in how one's scarf is tied might signal new allegiance or subtle rebellion. It's not loud. It's not recorded in temple logs, but it shapes decisions all the same. You follow one of the attendants through a side passage into the women's wing of the palace. It's a soft space, quieter, draped with woven screens and smelling of rosewater and cinnamon. Here, conversation blooms under the hum of beeswax lamps. Two women examine a jewelry box together, lifting pendants and bracelets, measuring weight and craftsmanship. One admires a turquoise ring, but does not ask to borrow it. The other does not offer. Nothing needs to be said. In another corner, a harpist plays while a younger woman practices a dance. Her movements are slow, deliberate, arms tracing invisible arcs in the air. This dance, she's told, might be performed at the New Year's festival, or for the Pharaoh, or perhaps not at all. But practice, in the court, is never wasted. Every gesture learned is another tool sharpened for future use. And behind all this is the constant awareness. They are always being watched, not just by attendants, but by the palace itself. Every entrance has its watchers, every hall its echoes. A misstep, even in private, can ripple outward. That joke told too loudly. That night, the wrong wine was poured. That time, someone left the queen's chambers too early or too late. Memory clings to the court like dust to perfume cones. And women must remember everything. Historians still debate the influence of royal women in Khufu's time. Was the queen a silent figure, or did she shape policy from behind embroidered curtains? Did concubines wield sway in temple donations? Did priestesses send messages tucked in cosmetic jars? The records are unclear, sometimes suspiciously so. But there are signs, names etched in hidden corners, donations recorded in the names of women. A set of letters, carefully buried, referring to the lady who speaks for the sun. Even outside the inner circle, the pressures remain. Daughters of court scribes are trained early in poise and speech. They may never rise to prominence, but they must never embarrass the family. A giggle at the wrong moment could ruin a father's promotion. A misplaced ornament could spark whispers. These young women learn fast that survival isn't about grandeur. It's about understanding the rules no one writes down. And yet, amid the tension, there is also tenderness. You witness a woman brushing another's hair with slow, practiced strokes while singing softly under her breath. You see a group laughing around a tray of sweets, faces briefly unguarded. A clay doll rests beside a cushion, forgotten after some play. These moments are real too. This is not a prison, not entirely. There is companionship here, even friendship. But it is a kind of friendship forged in fire, a bond strengthened by shared pressure, not freedom. Even motherhood is complicated. Some women bear children for the pharaoh, others for noblemen. Some never have children at all. Those who do may not raise them, especially if the child is deemed politically significant. A boy born to a favored consort might be whisked away to the house of instruction. A girl might be promised in marriage before her third birthday. The joy of birth is shadowed by the weight of what that child will be used for. You pause in one room where a woman sits alone, staring at a polished obsidian mirror. Her face is unreadable. Perhaps she's a wife, or a daughter, or someone once close to the queen. The room is silent, but full of tension. You sense it in the curve of her spine, the stillness of her hands. Maybe she's waiting. Maybe she's remembering. Or maybe she's calculating. Here, beauty isn't just appearance, it's leverage and burden. Because to be beautiful here is to be expected. Expected to shine, to perform, to attract favor without overreaching, to age without fading, to be graceful but never too proud, poised but never cold, desirable but never dangerous. Unless, of course, danger is the point. It's a performance with no intermission, and no lines written in advance. As night falls, lamps are lit in the women's quarters, casting amber reflections against polished bronze mirrors. The air is still warm, fragrant, intimate, but the eyes watching from the hallway remain. And behind every silk curtain, a game is always being played. Because in this palace, beauty brings its own weight, and these women, balancing it with every step, know exactly what it costs to be seen. Dawn creeps in gently over the palace walls, gilding everything in quiet gold, and once again, the illusion must begin. You stir, not because the court is loud, but because it never really sleeps. Somewhere, musicians are tuning their lyres. Servants are sweeping the stone courtyards with palm brooms. Priests are already chanting beneath their breath. Another festival day is upon you, and the wheels of the spectacle are turning with soft precision. like the gears of a grand machine made of incense and expectations. Today's festival, like all others, is less about celebration and more about choreography, about reminding the people and the gods that everything in Egypt is exactly as it should be. Matt, the divine balance is upheld. The Pharaoh is strong. The gods are pleased. The harvest will be plentiful. These truths, whether real or not, must be made visible. Ritual is how Egypt breathes, and breath here is performance. In the central courtyard, you watch as attendants scatter lotus petals along the path where the Pharaoh will walk. They do this slowly, meticulously, as if each petal were a sacred word. Behind them, another teen lays fresh mats, sprinkles fragrant water, and straightens painted banners hanging from columns. Nothing is left to chance. The illusion must be seamless, even under the glaring sun. A row of musicians enters, harpists, flutists, and sistrum players with bells strung from bronze crescents. Their instruments shimmer in the light, but their eyes stay low, focused. One girl adjusts the tuning pegs on her lyre with hands that tremble slightly. Maybe it's her first time performing in front of the king. Maybe she's just cold. But here, nerves are silent. One wrong note, one stumble, and you don't just lose favor. You risk upsetting the gods. The procession begins. Pharaoh Khufu, towering in regalia, steps onto the scene not as a man, but as a vision. He wears the white crown of Upper Egypt today, tall and unbending. His collar glitters with inlaid turquoise. His staff gleams. A canopy of ostrich feathers shades him from the heat, carried by attendants whose faces remain blank, despite the strain. The crowd gathered along the palace edge murmur softly. Peasants, nobles, soldiers alike, all eyes trained on the living god. He doesn't smile. He doesn't need to. He moves slowly, deliberately, each footstep rehearsed to convey permanence. The priests chant from their scrolls, voices rising like wind through stone canyons. They burn incense in large clay basins, the smoke curling around the feet of statues, forming invisible veils between earth and sky. You're pulled into the ceremony like a leaf into the Nile. The rhythm, the scent, the color, it drowns you in beauty. And yet, part of you wonders, does anyone believe all of this? Or is it just momentum? The illusion has lasted so long that even questioning it feels sacrilegious. But still, you watch how the high priest raises the offering bread, how he holds it just long enough to catch the light, how the Pharaoh's nod is perfectly timed to follow. It's less about belief and more about mastery. Later, at the festival's second stage, dancers move in unison across polished stones, their anklets chiming in time with the sistrums. They wear sheer linen stitched with gold thread, and their eyes are rimmed in thick kohl. Each spin, each bend of the wrist, mirrors a story. The myth of Isis reassembling Osiris, the sun's journey through the underworld, the pharaoh's own divine birth. Its history retold without words, a language older than ink. And of course, there's food. Heaps of roasted duck, honeyed dates, lentil stews, and flatbreads spiced with cumin. Servants fan the tables. Courtiers murmur politely. But the feast, like everything else, is staged. The real politics happen between bites, in the raised eyebrow across the table, in the seating arrangement, in who refills the pharaoh's cup first. One noblewoman spills a drop of wine on her sleeve and covers it with a laugh. Her neighbor does not laugh. You note it silently. By midday, the illusion reaches its peak. The priests unveil a golden bark, meant to carry the statue of the god Re through the temple's sacred route. The statue itself is hidden, veiled in linen and mystery. But the carriage, with its painted hull and ivory trim, gleams in the sun like something divine. Trumpets sound. The crowd bows, and the pharaoh raises both hands. He speaks just one word. You don't even catch it. It's swallowed by the roar of celebration, by the chants, by the music. But it doesn't matter. No one came to hear his voice. They came to witness his presence. And in that, the illusion is perfect. But behind the scenes, something else stirs. You slip away from the procession, past the shade of a colonnade where servants are catching their breath. One peels off his sandals and massages his feet. Another rolls her eyes behind a pillar. This is where the truth peeks through, briefly, behind a curtain. The paint on the ceremonial walls is fading. The linen banner tore last week and had to be patched. The golden bark? A thin sheet of leaf over acacia wood. None of it lasts, but it doesn't have to. It only needs to hold long enough for belief to renew itself. Historians still debate how deeply these festivals shaped the minds of the people. Did they see through the glitter, or did the sheer beauty of it all carry them away? Were the rituals sincerely felt, or simply expected? Perhaps both. Perhaps it didn't matter. When illusion becomes tradition, and tradition becomes identity, the line between truth and theater vanishes entirely. Even the Pharaoh, seated under his plumed canopy, seems briefly distant. You wonder if he feels the weight of it, the need to be more than human every single day. To never stumble, never age, never sigh. His sandals are gold, yes, but they still leave impressions in the dust. As the festival winds down and the court retires, the petals on the paths begin to curl. The incense fades. The dancers remove their jewelry. The divine, it seems, is just as tired as the rest of us. But the illusion will be ready again tomorrow. Because in Egypt, ritual is not optional. It is the scaffolding that holds up the world. And everyone, from Pharaoh to fanbearer, has learned their part by heart. By now, you've seen the polish, the glitter, the gold leaf and lotus petals, the perfumed feasts and carefully worded prayers. You've watched scribes ink royal records and dancers spin in tribute to gods who don't answer. You've seen the pyramid rise under sun-scorched hands, and the palace shimmer like a mirage of perfection. But when you peel back the linen, fold by careful fold, you find the real machinery. The gears of Egypt's empire aren't gilded. They're bone, ink, sweat, and silence. You start your morning at the palace's administrative wing, a less theatrical part of court, but no less powerful. This is where the empire keeps score. Scrolls are delivered, unrolled, updated. Messengers come and go, feet dusty, eyes wide, faces blank. Each bears news from the outer provinces. Grain counts from the Fayum, labor disputes from a quarry upriver, missing tribute from a priesthood in Thebes. Each complaint is recorded, filtered, and rerouted to the appropriate overseer. A mistake here doesn't cost embarrassment. It costs lives. You pass rows of scribes working elbow to elbow in silence. Their reed pens flick across papyrus, like bird feet across sand. They are clerks, yes, but not powerless. One misplaced number could delay an entire barge convoy. One missing signature could cost a noble his estate. In a kingdom of hierarchies, even paper carries the weight of the Nile. Further inside, you glimpse a royal steward quietly discussing livestock requisitions with a temple representative. Their tones are calm, but their eyes are sharp. Every word matters. The steward nods at a scribe, who quickly records the outcome and seals the scroll with a dollop of beeswax. Another transaction, another cog turned. You wonder how many of these small decisions eventually shape edicts that echo from palace to pyramid. And it's not just logistics. Politics courses through every hallway. That servant who changes the queen's linens. He's overheard 2 arguments and 3 reconciliations this week. The nursemaid rocking a noble's child also carried messages wrapped in ribbon. The perfume merchant from Heliopolis? She's seen who ordered extra jars during times of mourning. No one in this palace is truly idle. Every task overlaps with intelligence. Gossip flows like the Nile, feeding decisions at every level. Behind a curtain, 2 priests speak in low tones about celestial alignments and offerings that seem off. You can't catch every word, but there's tension. A deity wasn't honored properly, or perhaps a festival was held too early. You'd think the gods could overlook a date or two, but here, divine protocol is statcraft. A misaligned ritual reflects poorly not only on the temple, but on the pharaoh himself. To offend the heavens is to invite disorder, and disorder in Egypt is death. Historians still debate whether Egypt was truly a centralized power or an illusion of it. Was the pharaoh the nucleus of control, or a symbol floating atop a web spun by clerks, priests, architects, and stewards? We don't have an answer. What we have are glimpses, tombs filled with ledgers, statues of officials with titles so specific they sound like parody. Overseer of the royal sandal laces, scribe of granary distributions in the western garrison. Each position part of an invisible current that carried the empire forward. You walk past a room where young apprentices recite their training aloud. A good scribe is better than a fine warrior. Ink does not decay. These sayings are written over doorways and chanted like prayers. They're not wrong. Warriors defend the kingdom with bronze, but scribes preserve it with memory. And memory is the root of power. Down one corridor, you enter a treasury annex, cool, silent, and dim. Clay jars line the walls, each labeled with a meticulous hand. Inside are lentils, dates, honey, oil. You'd expect piles of gold, but wealth here is measured in grain and labor. A sealed jar of wheat can buy loyalty. A shipment of barley might sway an official's vote. Even the pyramid, that eternal monument, is paid for in bread and beer. You pause beside a heavy chest filled with linen bolts. Wealth you can wear, fold, trade, all accounted for, all guarded closely. A chamber nearby is filled with carved ivory, copper tools, and small statues of gods, likely meant for export or gifts to high priests. A ledger lists each item with maddening precision. Nothing in this room sparkles like festival garb, but this is the marrow of Egypt's economy. Trade, tax, tally. Without this, the entire palace collapses beneath its own perfume. And then there's the silence. You start to notice it everywhere. The silence of those who've learned not to speak too soon. The silence of servants who've watched 3 dynasties and never been named. The silence of the queen's maid who folds linens while thinking of her home by the Nile. These quiet gears turn steadily, unseen. No one celebrates them in hymns. But without them, no gold throne, no divine ritual, no pyramid. At the edge of the palace, just beyond the storerooms, you see a single figure standing still beneath a carved archway. A steward? A priest? A scribe? You can't tell. He looks at the horizon, unmoving. Maybe he's waiting for a shipment. Maybe for news. Or maybe he's simply watching the sky, wondering, as so many have before, what does all of this build, really? Because when you peel away the paint and linen and incense, you're left with people, planning, calculating, hoping, surviving, each one with a hand on the crank of something larger. And somehow, miraculously, it worked. For centuries, it worked. The palace, the pyramid, the court, they were never just monuments. They were systems, machines, networks of labor and love and fear and precision, all held together by habit and hope. Power here doesn't roar. It whispers from behind ledgers. It clinks in clay jars. It lives beneath the linen, quiet and ancient. And as the lamps are lit for another evening, as the stewards count grain and the scribes sharpen pens, you find yourself back in the courtyard, the hum of the machine all around you. The scent of oil, the scratch of reed against papyrus, the warm glow of firelight in niches carved long before your time. This is where the illusion ends and the truth begins. Now, with all 4 journeys behind us, from the base of the pyramid to the corridors of command, it's time to settle in. Let your breath slow. Let the stone cool. And when you're ready, we'll bring it all to a close. And that's where we'll leave it for tonight. From the sun-bleached quarries that tore stone from the earth to the blinding symmetry of the king's tomb. From the sweat-stained hands that dragged sledges through sand to the quiet courtyards where politics whispered behind perfume. A long, slow walk through the heart of an empire built on faith, fear, and flour-dusted bread. If you're still awake, thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. And if you drifted off somewhere between the melted incense cones and the overseer's whistle, that's perfectly fine too. That's kind of the whole point. If you enjoyed this slower, sleep-friendly dive into history, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it was when you pressed play. It's always nice seeing where in the world these late-night history journeys are reaching. For now, I'll let the clink of amphory fade, the soft shuffle of sandals down temple halls grow distant, and the torches dim behind palace walls one by one. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time.